Okay, now we should be live, and we should be live on both YouTube and Twitch. Oh, that is so loud. That can just we're not doing that. Okay, let me get the YouTube chat up on the screen. What the heck was that? Okay, I gotta switch accounts. That was something. Okay, we should be live on both. We were definitely live on Twitch. Let me just. Yep, looks like we're good on the YouTube end of things as well. All right, I don't need to hear myself. There we go. All right. So today we are going to be reading The Fellowship of the Ring, which I have with me right here. My actual childhood copy. Well, one of them at least. But this is the one that I've had. This was printed 2 years before I was born. And you know what? It's still not that bad shape, you know, considering it's been read so many times. But part of the reason behind that is that it mostly sits in a box set, which I think keeps it quite preserved. All right, let me just go ahead and get the word out that we're live. It's not a link that I'm just... It's not a link that I just happen to have all the time. I'm going to have to learn how to... Come on. Oh. There we go. Not that. How did that happen? I thought I had switched accounts. We're getting there. We're getting there. Okay. All right, now we're talking. There we go. Okay. All right, let me go ahead and get the word out that we're live. Oh, that's not quite it. Well, wait, what's the issue with that link? There we go. All right. That should do it. Okay. I feel like I should have some music going for the intro here. Hey Alice, how goes it? There we go. All right, now I have music, just for the intro. And let me go ahead and also I want to text Laurel. That's probably easiest done on my phone, which is over here. Hey Bogle. Atlas, that's amazing. Is that lips thing like just a global YouTube emote, or? He's got the two eyes. of Sauron. Why does he only have one eye? Why not two, right? Okay, let me... Yeah, there's Laurel. Okay. So I had posted on the community tab of YouTube and announcing sort of a, you know, a stream schedule of sorts for the next few streams, which was this stream. Well, I'm glad you're having a relaxing day. Which is this stream here on April the 10th. Hey there, Chewy. How's it going? Oh, I like the Vulcan silhouette one there. That's cool. All right. And we're also going to be live next week. I'm live every day on Twitch, but I'm talking about for YouTube. I'm going to be live next week, the 17th of April. And I put it on the schedule as a TBA. Now, in 3 weeks, on the 1st, May the 1st, we're going to have the Council of Tolkien, of course, with Matt and Sid. But next week's stream, next Thursday, because I want to make these YouTube streams a more regular thing, you know, maybe not every single Thursday, but most Thursdays. I mean, I also have the List Critics podcast on, that's last Thursday of the week on Twitch. But, I've been thinking of like a few different things that we can do. We could play a Tolkien video game. We could maybe we could do some quizzes. I recorded some new content related to quizzes. There's about 4 of these that I recorded, where I just go on YouTube and I take these quizzes, and it's not really to see if I know the answers, because they're all, you know, sort of dreadfully easy, even the ones that say hardcore fans only, but just sort of grading them, because, like, let's see, does the person who made the quiz know their stuff? And sometimes the answer is surprisingly not. Like, I'll tell you, the biggest thing that I've run into with that is, hey Daniel, how's it going? And I saw that you joined as a member. Thank you for doing that. One of the biggest things I've seen with the Tolkien quizzes on... yes, absolutely, and I'm going to talk about that as well. On YouTube is a lot of times more than one of the answers are correct. When it's multiple choice. There was one question, this was a particularly egregious example, where it was, which of these characters is the king of Rohan? And the answer that they were looking for was, of course, Theoden. But Éomer was on there as well, which is also correct, because in The Return of the King, Theoden dies, and then Éomer becomes the king after him. So, you know, they're both kings of Rohan. So, you know, I run into a lot of things like there was actually one, I forgot what it was, but you guys will see the video when it goes up. But there was one where it was a multiple choice of 4 answers, and all 4 of them were technically correct in one way or another. You know, just poorly written. You know what? That's a pretty good idea, because I had asked Phil. And Phil said that he was honored to be asked to be a moderator on the YouTube side of things, but that he wasn't feeling up to it at the moment. And that was a while back. I might have to approach him again and see if he's feeling any better. And I had asked Zach, too, but and he said yes. And I said, all you need to do is send me a link to your YouTube account so that I can add you, because YouTube's not like YouTube is not like Twitch. You have to have a link to, you have to have their URL and put it into your account as a moderator. And he hadn't gotten back to me before the last stream, and I sent him another message like earlier today and said, hey, you know, if you're still interested, but I haven't seen him around, and I hope he's okay. But who knows? But that's a good idea, that I'll make a community post about it, to say, hey, you know, if somebody wants to be a moderator, because right now, Alice is pretty much the only moderator on the YouTube side of things, and we have plenty of moderators on the Twitch side of things. But yeah, I don't know. Oh, I'm not recording this, but that's okay because it's I don't need to. I don't need to record it. The only reason that I would record it is if I was to accidentally curse and I had to edit it to bleep myself. But I don't think that's an issue with reading the Fellowship of the Ring. We've only had that issue with the Council of Tolkien, where Sid will accidentally slip up, But that's okay. Easily fixed, right? There's my water. Oh, that's not where it should be. That's not within reach. But yeah, that's an interesting idea to just to have it as a community posted application thing. Yeah, because I would like to have at least 2 or 3 moderators. I mean, at least 2 on the YouTube side of things. I mean, I could ask Wayne, but he's not always here for the until later on. We'll figure it out, right? We always do. I do have a slight headache, but I feel like it's not going to be an issue today. It's not going to be an issue at all. But welcome in, everybody. Like I said, we are going to read the Fellowship of the Ring today. Let's see, where did we... I think we did The Ring Goes South. In book 2. Ring Goes South. There it is. So yes, we ended right at the end. Oh, so book 2, chapter 3, The Ring Goes South. That's where we stopped. So we're going to start with book 2, chapter 4, A Journey in the Dark. Where is that bookmark I have? I have this ridiculous bookmark that Matt sent me, which I'll show you guys. It's from the Hobbit movie, and it has Thorin Oakenshield on it, which was... It came with a pen. The pen was what I really wanted, but this is the bookmark. We'll just put that in there. Chicken salad sandwich on an onion bagel. That is my kind of eating. Where is that pen anyway? Actually, it's probably sitting up on the rack behind me, so I'm not going to worry about it. I should bring it over here and put it in this container that I have here. I have this big container here that I have about this scissors and USB drives and a multi-tool and a whole bunch of charging cables and things of that nature in there. It sits over here. I should put the pen in there. But yeah, I'm actually using the bookmark for once. But yeah, you saw what I had for dinner. I made that mac and cheese, which was very good. I hadn't made a nice cheddar sauce in a while, so it was good to do that. It was a quick one too. We only had 2 kinds of pasta. We had cavatappi, which is what I used, and we had penne, which I like penne, but it just doesn't equate for me, mac and cheese with penne. That doesn't make sense to me. There's certain types of pasta that work for, like if it was a more like a traditional Italian baked macaroni, like baked ziti or that kind of thing, I could see using penne. Or there's a pizzeria not super far from me that I love, but it's very expensive, so I don't get it very often. But they did like this Cajun chicken penne thing, which was really good. I mean, listen to me, I sound like a hobbit, I'm just talking about food, and that is a common thing in the chats, not specifically for Tolkien streams, but for all like gaming streams and everything. It always devolves to food, as WT says, And I think it's just because we're all hobbits at heart a little bit. You know, we just want to... We would love to eat 6 meals a day, right? I mean, why have just one breakfast? Why not have 2 breakfasts? And then essentially 2 lunches and 2 dinners. That's, you know, because you have, you know, breakfast and second breakfast, which second breakfast is sometimes in rural English culture also referred to as elevensies, which is a thing that Peter Jackson misunderstood. He didn't really misunderstand it, but he thought it would be funny if second breakfast and elevensies were treated as 2 separate things, and he's right, it was funnier. You'd love that, but your doctor wouldn't, right? Well, you know, just tell him you're a hobbit, that's all, right? And then your 2 lunches are essentially your lunch and your afternoon tea, and then you have dinner and supper. And then you go to bed. Now, what's interesting is that they never really tell you the makeup of all of the 6 meals, or like what the typically is. And it is true that not all hobbits would eat 6 meals a day all the time. They enjoyed to have 6 meals a day when they could get it, which was not always, you know. Somebody like Bilbo, for instance, would probably have 6 meals a day every single day, whereas somebody like Sam probably not as many meals, not all the time, you know. Although I'm sure both Bilbo and Frodo were sure to keep him fed. You know, he was a working class guy, and he was working a lot. He didn't have as much leisure time. And even in his retirement, when he had money, I mean, he had so many responsibilities. He was the mayor for 49 years, and he had 13 children, which is just like, wow, you know? Wow. You know, and it's interesting because Sam's wife, future wife, Rose Cotton, also known as Rosie, she's not mentioned at all in The Lord of the Rings until, you know, the very end of The Return of the King, when she's in the actual story. The films put her in the beginning as a sort of a barmaid that Sam had a crush on, you know, and then later he asked her out, and then it kind of skips forward to, you know, the marriage. In the book, it's meant to be understood that she's already his girlfriend, and that she's actually like waiting for him to propose when he goes off with Frodo. And she's pretty upset about it. She's pretty upset about it when he comes back, and, you know, you better have a good reason, you know, that kind of thing. But what's interesting is that she wasn't mentioned prior. You know what I mean? That Sam had a girlfriend. And I just wonder if this is one of those things that was a regret that J.R.R. Tolkien had, because in his own critique of The Lord of the Rings, he said that it was too short, and that there were errors, and that he would have loved to have rewritten the whole thing, you know, to do like another draft of it and to make it quite a bit longer. You know, of course, if he was allowed to do whatever he may, we never would have... I mean, it would have been published years after he died. He never would have finished it. It would have been like all of his other stories, you know? In other news, and this is Quora-related news, I was speaking to a gentleman who was another writer on Quora, whose name is, I believe, Alex Mann. Yeah, there he is. And me and Alex were talking about the possibility of doing some sort of collaborative writing, because he's a history expert, and I'm a Tolkien, you know, quote, I don't like to use the term expert. I prefer to use the term scholar, but you know, and a lot of Tolkien's earliest stories were formed out of his experiences in World War I. Not that any of them were allegorical, but that you know, he went through a lot. And you know, and I said to Alex, well, you know, it's very interesting because he was still in it's not like he came home from the war and then wrote what he saw. He was still in a military hospital when he started writing his first 3 stories, and Alex was like, I see, this is what I'm talking about. I didn't even know that. And there's probably a whole bunch of things about World War I that I don't know that he would know. So yes, I was telling you about that on Wednesday. So we're talking about the possibility of doing something together. It came from Alex actually suggesting to the Quora staff that there should be a way for writers to collaborate together, built into the website, and we're not sure if that could ever actually be implemented, but there are lots of ways for writers to collaborate without it being, in the website itself. And he used an example, me as an example, that we could look at how World War I affected Tolkien and write some sort of paper about that. So that might happen. We'll just have to see. I mean, I'm excited about it, and Alex seems excited about it. I mean, after all, it was his idea. But we'll see how that goes. All right, so we're going to get started here. Let me kill the music. We're not going to have music playing while I read. I just like to have something playing behind me while I'm talking at the beginning of a stream. We're going to come over here. And I seem a little off center here. Let me just sort of... That's better. Okay. Yeah, I'll certainly let you know. So to recap, we are starting in Book 2, Chapter 4, A Journey in the Dark. So, of course, we know that, the plot of Book 1 is Frodo discovering that the ring that he had received as an inheritance from his older cousin, Bilbo Baggins, the star of the Hobbit, was the One Ring and actually belonged to the Dark Lord Sauron, and Sauron wants it back. And that puts him and everybody around him in danger, so he goes off on his journey to Rivendell. And he arrived in Rivendell, going through some hardships. He got stabbed, brutalized by the Nazgul, who are the wraiths, the ring wraiths. That's what Nazgul means. It comes from Nazg, which is ring, and Gul, which is wraith. It's actually the other way around. I was seeing if you're paying attention. And he has become a part of the Fellowship of the Ring, along with his 3 friends, Sam and Merry and Pippin. 2 men, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, whom he calls Strider, and Boromir, the man of Gondor. Of course, Gandalf is also with him, the dwarf Gimli, and the elf Legolas. And they have traveled to the south of Rivendell. They've gone to the south. And hello there, Medio Surreal. How's it going? And they have attempted the Pass of Caradhras, also known as the Redhorn Pass, which they were blighted by a storm. They have turned back, and they were weighing their options, and they decided they needed to go into Moria. Aragorn was not too happy about this idea. And as they were trying to figure out how to get into Moria, right after Gandalf actually figured out how to open the door, the Watcher and the Water attacked, and they ran into the mines, and then the door was collapsed behind them, so they have no choice but to go through. So let's start here with Chapter 4, A Journey in the Dark. It was evening, and the grey light was again waning fast when they halted for the night. They were very weary. The mountains were veiled in deepening dusk, and the wind was cold. Gandalf spared them one more mouthful each of the Mirovor of Rivendell. When they had eaten some food, he called a council. Hold on one moment. Is this where we should be? Okay, I just got ahead of myself. I had forgotten that we had not read the part about the door at Moria. So, for some reason, I was thinking they were already in there. But it's been a month. Let's continue. "We cannot, of course, go on again tonight," he said. "The attack on the Redhorn Gate has tired us out, and we must rest here for a while." "And then where are we to go?" asked Frodo. "We still have our journey and our errand before us," answered Gandalf. "We have no choice but to go on, or return to Rivendell." Pippin's face brightened visibly at the mere mention of return to Rivendell. Merry and Sam looked up hopefully, but Aragorn and Boromir made no sign. Frodo looked troubled. "I wish I was back there," he said. "But how can I return without shame, unless there is indeed no other way, and we are already defeated?" "You are right, Frodo," said Gandalf. "To go back now is to admit defeat, and face worse defeat to come. If we go back now, then the ring must remain there. We shall not be able to set out again. Then, sooner or later, Rivendell will be besieged, and after a brief and bitter time, it will be destroyed. The ring-wraiths are deadly enemies, but they are only shadows yet of the power and terror that would possess if the ruling ring were on their master's hand again." "Then we must go on if there is a way," said Frodo with a sigh. Sam sank back into gloom. "There is a way that we may attempt," said Gandalf. "I thought from the beginning, when I first considered this journey, that we should try it, but it is not a pleasant way, and I have not spoken of it to the company before. Aragorn was against it, until the pass over the mountains had at least been tried." "If there is a worse road than the Red Horn Gate, then it must be evil indeed," said Merry. "But you had better tell us about it and let us know the worst at once." "The road that I speak of leads to the mines of Moria," said Gandalf. Only Gimli lifted up his head. A smouldering fire was in his eyes. On all the others a dread fell at the mention of that name. Even to the hobbits it was a legend of vague fear. "It is a name of ill omen," said Boromir. "Nor do I see the need to go there. If we cannot cross the mountains, let us journey southward until we come to the Gap of Rohan, where men are friendly to my people, taking the road that I followed on my way hither. Or we might pass by and cross the Isen into Langstrand and Lebanon, and so come to Gondor from the regions nigh to the sea." "Things have changed since you came north, Boromir," answered Gandalf. "Did you not hear what I told you of Saruman? With him I have business of my own ere all is over, but the ring must not come near Isengard if that can by any means be prevented. The Gap of Rohan is closed to us while we go with the bearer. As for the longer road, we cannot afford the time. We might spend a year in such a journey, and we should pass through many lands that are empty and harbourless. Yet they would not be safe. The watchful eyes both of Saruman and of the enemy are on them. When you came north, Boromir, you were in the enemy's eyes, only to stray wanderer from the south and a matter of small concern to him. His mind was busy with the pursuit of the ring, but you return now as a member of the ring's company, and you are in peril as long as you remain with us. The danger will increase with every league that we go south under the naked sky." So, let's stop here for a moment. What Gandalf is essentially saying here is that it is incredibly imperative that they take the most direct route that they can. And oftentimes, especially on Quora, I'm asked a lot of questions of why didn't they go this way or why didn't they go that way. And one of the most ridiculous ones that crops up a lot of times is specifically about Mordor, and of instead of trying to get through the Black Gate or going through Cirith Ungol, why not go all the way to the east and go around the Ash Mountains? And it's like, well, it's way too much time spent in Mordor at that point, and you come very close to the Dark Tower, and there are a lot of rivers to cross. It's too much in hostile territory, especially that the lands to the east are hostile territory controlled by Sauron. So that's really important to remember. And that comes up every once in a while. I would say I get that question about once a month or so. Why didn't they just go around the Ash Mountains? Referring specifically to Frodo and Sam. But sometimes the route from Rivendell to Mordor is questioned. And I'm going to actually show you one of the most egregious examples of this sort of thing that I'd ever seen. I just need to bring up a Middle-earth map here, so let me get my bookmark in there. And let's see if we can bring up a map of of Middle-earth. We have an interactive one here. This will work. Okay. So let's show this here. Why isn't it working? There we go. So here we have a... oh, my webcam's all the way down there. Let me fix that. Here we have a map of Middle-earth. And if we look at it here, you know what? It's probably better to... Let's zoom in a bit. Can we get rid of this? Thank you. So at this point, if we look at this, this is Eriador here. And here's the Shire. And here is the route that Bilbo took. And this is not the road that, of course, that is being taken in The Lord of the Rings. They're going down from here, down this way. And right now, they're right around here. And they're going to have to go back up and go through Moria. Now, one of the routes that I'd seen, somebody asked me, why didn't they do this, is from Rivendell to go all the way back to the west, to get on a boat, and then to sail it all the way down here, and up this way, through the Anduin to Osgiliath, putting you at Mordor. And it's just sort of like the most ridiculous thing, because obviously such a long journey by sea, you're not getting any sort of supplies here, but also this area is very dangerous. I mean, you have, you know, the Corsairs of Umbar in that area, and yeah, it's terrible. And the thing is, and this is why we talked about this last time, who caused the storm over Carathris that basically forced them to go through Moria. And a lot of options were talked about. You know, Gimli himself thought, well, that the mountain itself did it. Some of the characters questioned whether Sauron had anything to do with it. The version presented in the film was that Saruman was directly causing it, and it could have just been a storm. Now, I personally think that it was Iluvatar that caused it, because they have to go through Moria. And the reason that they absolutely have to go through Moria, you might think, well, of course, because of the Balrog and because of Gandalf the White, and that's very, very important. But that's not the reason that they have to go through Moria. The big reason that they have to go through Moria is Gollum is in Moria. And because Gollum is in Moria, if they don't go through there, the ring never gets destroyed. Let me catch up on chat here. Hey, Callum, how's it going? Have I heard of or played DAC? It's Third Age, Total War, Divide and Conquer. No, I have not heard of that, actually. You listen to my hour-plus videos while I say... You know, I've been told that many, many times, and I don't take it any sort of negative way. I've been told a lot of times that people like to listen to me while they sleep, and that is... that's pretty cool, actually, I think. You know, and what you know, it's great for me because you're letting the videos play and you're not skipping any ads or anything. So there is that as well. Okay, the webcam's hiding everything. There we go. Okay. But welcome in, everybody. So, yeah, no, I've never played that or even heard of that, to be honest with you. So, let's move onwards here. So, yeah, the idea that Boromir has is to go really far south, and Gandalf shoots that down. So the thought of actually going back through Eriador and going to Mithlond and boarding a ship, and it's never going to happen. It takes all the fun out of the story, too, I should add. Since our open attempt on the mountain pass, our plight has become more desperate, I fear. I see now little hope if we do not soon vanish from sight for a while and cover our trail. Therefore, I advise that we should go neither over the mountains, nor round them, but under them. That is a road, at any rate, that the enemy will least expect us to take. We do not know what he expects, said Boromir. He may watch all roads, likely and unlikely. In that case, to enter Moria would be to walk into a trap. Hardly better than knocking at the gates of the Dark Tower itself. The name of Moria is black. So just to pause here, I know I just paused, but the name of Moria is black is a very interesting... thank you, Daniel. It's a very interesting phrase because Moria is a Sindarin term, and there's no reason to believe that Boromir does not speak Sindarin. He's a man of Gondor. Gondor has its own dialect of Sindarin that is actually the official language of Gondor. Moria means black pit. So, and we see that we see that as black in things like Morgul Vale, Minas Morgul, or that sort of thing. So, heard from, I'm not sure what that is, OSRS. Hello, Sid and for Sithis, how's it going? So we see that a lot. Moria is black pit. So he's being quite literal when he says the name of Moria is black, even if he's not being as clever as he thinks he is. The other thing that I wanted to mention here is, well, maybe we'll hold off on talking about that until we're a little bit closer to the gate here.
You speak of what you do not know, when you liken Moria to the stronghold of Sauron, answered Gandalf. I alone of you have ever been in the dungeons of the Dark Lord, and only in his older and lesser dwelling in Dol Guldur. Those who pass the gates of Barad-dûr do not return. But I would not lead you into Moria if there were no hope of coming out again. If there are orcs in there, it may prove ill for us, if that is true. But most of the orcs of the Misty Mountains were scattered or destroyed in the Battle of Five Armies. The eagles report that orcs are gathering again from afar, but there is a hope that Moria is still free. There is even a chance that dwarves are there, and that in some deep hall of his fathers, Balin, son of Fundin, may be found. However it may prove, one must tread the path that needs chooses. I will tread the path with you, Gandalf, said Gimli. I will go and look on the halls of Durin. Weather may wait there. If you can find the doors that are shut, good Gimli, said Gandalf. You encourage me. We will seek the hidden doors together, and we will come through. In the ruins of the dwarves, a dwarf's head will be less easy to bewilder than elves or men or hobbits. Yet it will not be the first time that I have been to Moria. I sought there long for Thrain, son of Thror, after he was lost. I passed through, and I came out again alive.
I too once passed in the Dimrill Gate, said Aragorn quietly. But though I also came out again, the memory is very evil. I do not wish to enter Moria a second time. And I don't want to enter it even once, said Pippin. Nor me, muttered Sam.
Of course not, said Gandalf. Who would? But the question is, who will follow me if I lead you there? I will, said Gimli eagerly.
I will, said Aragorn heavily. You followed my lead almost to disaster in the snow, and have said no word of blame. I will follow your lead now, if this last warning does not move you. It is not of the ring, nor of us others that I am thinking now, but of you, Gandalf. And I say to you, if you pass the doors of Moria, beware. All right. I have to talk about a few things here. There's a lot going on. So, a lot of times, due to, the sort of cultural proliferation of Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings, people forget that it was Gandalf's idea to go into Moria. That it was 100% him coming up with this, and that Aragorn was against it. They sort of made it like it was the Gimli's idea in the movie, and then Gandalf was sort of like, I don't know if we have to, but, I don't think it's such a great idea. We see a very different side of Gandalf here, where he's saying, look, the way that I'm thinking is really nasty. Will you follow me? And he's sort of leaving it up to everybody and getting their opinions. There are a few more opinions that I haven't gotten to. But what is interesting here is what Aragorn says. I'm going to read that part again. Specifically what Aragorn said. It is not of the ring, nor of us others that I am thinking now, but of you, Gandalf. And I say to you, if you pass the doors of Moria, beware. Now, we have to ask ourselves, why is Aragorn specifically worrying about Gandalf? Now, Aragorn had been in Moria before, and it was likely when he was coming from the south to the north, returning from his time in places like Gondor and Rohan, when he was called Thorongil, the Eagle Star, when he was a young man. And the legends of Thorongil in those lands states that he, just kind of vanished, and it may be that he just kind of vanished because he went into Moria. And Gandalf, of course, he was looking for Thrain. He did not find Thrain there. Of course, he found him in Dol Guldur, of all places. That was sort of mentioned in The Hobbit. But what's really interesting here is this warning that Aragorn states. He says, I'm not worried about the ring or Frodo or myself or any of these other guys. It's you, Gandalf. And of course, we know what happens to Gandalf in there. This is a really good example of Aragorn proving that he has the gift of foresight. That's not necessarily stating that he can divine the future, but the best way to put it is that he's just got a bad feeling about it. And of course, it proves to be correct, though like many things that are bad, they lead to good. Gandalf falls, they're all very sad about it, but of course it leads to Gandalf the White. So, it's very interesting here. We have to consider Aragorn's heritage. He comes from the Dunedain, of course. He's descended from Elendil and Isildur and Aragorn, of course, but Anarion, of course. But going further back, Elrond's brother, Eärendil and Elwing, Turgon, Melian. He has a lot of elves in his distant family tree, and one angel, Melian. So there's a lot of really noble and extremely magical blood, diluted though it may be, that has made its way down through the ages and is now sitting here in Aragorn. And he's saying, I've got a bad feeling about this, related specifically to you, Gandalf. Well, let's continue. I will not go, said Boromir, not unless the vote of the whole company is against me. What do Legolas and the little folk say? The ring-bearer's voice surely should be heard. I do not wish to go to Moria, said Legolas. The hobbits said nothing. Sam looked at Frodo. At last Frodo spoke. I do not wish to go, he said, but neither do I wish to refuse the advice of Gandalf. I beg that there should be no vote until we have slept on it. Gandalf will get votes easier in the light of morning than in this cold gloom. How the wind howls! At these words, all fell into silent thought. They heard the wind hissing among the rocks and trees, and there was a howling and wailing round them in the empty spaces of the night. Suddenly Aragorn leapt to his feet. How the wind howls, he cried. It is howling with wolf voices. The wargs have come west of the mountains. Need we wait until morning, then? Said Gandalf. It is as I said, the hunt is up. Even if we live to see the dawn, who now will wish to journey south by night with the wild wolves on his trail? How far is Moria? Asked Boromir. There was a door southwest of Carithris, some 15 miles as the crow flies, and maybe 20 as the wolf runs, answered Gandalf grimly. Then let us start as soon as it is light tomorrow, if we can, said Boromir. The wolf that one hears is worse than the orc that one fears. True, said Aragorn, loosening his sword in its sheath. But where the warg howls, there also the orc prowls. I just have to pause, and it's interesting that they're Aragorn and Boromir are sort of trading idioms, and they're both these sort of rhyming slang, you know. Of course, you know, just let's see. Where's the one that Boromir said? Yeah, the wolf that one hears is worse than the orc that one fears. You know, that's definitely a sort of rhyming, sort of advice idiom that you hear what we may call something like an old wives' tale or something like that, and then Aragorn replies with, "Where the warg howls, there also the orc prowls," which is also another rhyming sort of old wives' tale sort of saying. And it's interesting that in replying to Boromir in a similar way, that he gives a rhyme and then is responded to with a rhyme, we're seeing the commonality between Boromir and Aragorn. They are both men of Gondor. Even though Aragorn's only been in Gondor a little bit, he fought in the armies, he didn't grow up there, he's not from Gondor. And on the other hand, Boromir has only recently ever traveled outside of Gondor. And, this is sort of his first big journey here. "I wish I had taken Elrond's advice," muttered Pippin to Sam. "I am no good after all. There is not enough of the breed of Bandabras the Bull Roarer in me. These howls freeze my blood. I don't ever remember feeling so wretched." "My heart's right down in my toes, Mr. Pippin," said Sam. "But we aren't eaten yet, and there are some stout folk here with us. Whatever may be in store for old Gandalf, I'll wager it isn't in a wolf's belly." So just to explain Pippin's reference here, Bandabras the Bull Roarer is referring to a hobbit by the name of Bandabras Took, who was also called Bull Roarer. He was Bilbo's grandfather, and, a little further back, actually, than grandfather. On his mother's side, his mother was Belladonna Took. His grandfather on that side is Gerontius, and you go a little further back and you get Bandabras Took. And Bandabras was a very big hobbit who actually would go off to war. Now, it's not that uncommon for hobbits to go off to war. It had happened in the past many times. Even in the wars against the Witch King, it was said that the Shire sent a battalion of archers to fight against the Witch King. We don't know what happened to them, and we don't know if necessarily that's true. That's just what the Shire records say. The records of the men and the elves don't mention that. But what's really interesting about it is that there were times in the past when the Shire was attacked by the forces of evil. There was a point where the water, which is really a river called the Brandywine, but the hobbits call it the water, froze, and wolves came out into the Shire across the frozen river and started attacking, and the hobbits had to fight them off. There was, of course, I mentioned this back when we were reading Book 1, where the trees actually started, from the old forest, they actually started invading the Shire a little bit, and a fence was built, and they were beaten back. And there was a time when orcs actually came to the Shire. And there was this one particular orc named Gulfinbull, and Bandabras Took cleaved off his head with a hammer and sent Gulfinbull's head sailing, however long it was that Bilbo said it was, and into a gopher hole, or maybe it was a rabbit hole, I forget which, and thus winning the war and inventing the game of golf, of course named after Gulfinbull, which I think, of course, was either Tolkien, having a bit of a joke there, or, Bilbo himself kind of joking around a little bit. But regardless of whether or not that story is 100% true, or whether it's partly true, or completely apocryphal, Bandabras is a legendary figure in, the modern Shire, and we can see here of Pippin, who is himself a Took, and a small guy. They mention that he's not as tall as Merry. Of course, Merry's very tall for a hobbit, and of course Pippin is also very young, although he mentions he's not going to grow very much more. That there's just not enough of Bandabras in him, which of course is going to prove to be not true. There's a lot of Bandabras in him, and Pippin does become quite the warrior. He's just not there yet. For their defense in the night, the company climbed to the top of the small hill under which they had been sheltering. It was crowned with a knot of old and twisted trees, about which lay a broken circle of boulder stones. In the midst of this they lit a fire, for there was no hope that darkness and silence would keep their trail from discovery by the hunting packs. Round the fire they sat, and those that were not on guard dozed uneasily. Poor Bill the pony trembled and sweated where he stood.
The howling of the wolves was now all round them, and sometimes nearer and sometimes further off. In the dead of night many shining eyes were seen peering over the brow of the hill. Some advanced almost to the ring of stones. At a gap in the circle a great dark wolf shape could be seen, halted, gazing at them. A shuddering howl broke from him, as if he were a captain summoning his pack to the assault. Gandalf stood up and strode forward, holding his staff aloft.
"Listen, hound of Sauron," he cried. "Gandalf is here. Fly, if you value your foul skin. I will shrivel you from tail to snout if you come within this ring."
The wolf snarled and sprang toward them with a great leap. At that moment there was a sharp twang. Legolas had loosed his bow. There was a hideous yell, and the leaping shape thudded to the ground. The elvish arrow had pierced its throat. The watching eyes were suddenly extinguished. Gandalf and Aragorn strode forward, but the hill was deserted. The hunting packs had fled. All about them the darkness grew silent, and no cry came on the sighing wind. The night was old, and westward the waning moon was setting, gleaming fitfully through the breaking clouds. Suddenly Frodo started from sleep. Without a warning, a storm of howls broke out, fierce and wild, all about the camp. A great host of wargs had gathered silently and was now attacking them from every side at once.
"Fling fuel onto the fire," cried Gandalf to the hobbits. "Draw your blades and stand back to back."
In the leaping light, as the fresh wood blazed up, Frodo saw many grey shapes spring over the ring of stones. More and more followed. Through the throat of one huge leader Aragorn passed his sword with a thrust, and with a great sweep Boromir hewed the head off another. Beside them, Gimli stood with his stout legs apart, wielding his dwarf axe. The bow of Legolas was singing. In the wavering firelight Gandalf seemed suddenly to grow. He rose up, a great menacing shape like the monument of some ancient king of stone set upon a hill. Stooping like a cloud, he lifted a burning branch and strode to meet the wolves. They gave back before him. High in the air he tossed the blazing brand. It flared with a sudden white radiance like lightning, and his voice rolled like thunder. "Naur an Adrathaman, Naur Danin Garhoth," he cried. There was a roar and a crackle, and the tree above him burst into a leaf and bloom of blinding flame. The fire leaped from tree-top to tree-top. The whole hill was crowned with dazzling light. The swords and knives of the defenders shone and flickered. The last arrow of Legolas kindled in the air as it flew, and plunged burning into the heart of a great wolf chieftain. All the others fled. Slowly the fire died, till nothing was left but falling ash and sparks. A bitter smoke curled above the burned tree stumps, and blew darkly from the hill as the first light of dawn came dimly in the sky. Their enemies were routed and did not return. "What did I tell you, Mr. Pippin?" said Sam, sheathing his sword. "Wolves won't get 'em. That was an eye-opener, make no mistake. Nearly singed the hair off my head." When the full light of the morning came, no sign of the wolves were to be found, and they looked in vain for the bodies of the dead. No trace of the fight remained but the charred trees and the arrows of Legolas lying on the hilltop. All were undamaged save one, of which only the point was left.
"It is as I feared," said Gandalf. "These were no ordinary wolves hunting for food in the wilderness. Let us eat quickly and go."
That day the weather changed again, almost as if it were commanded by some power that had no longer any use for snow. Since they had retreated from the pass, a power they wished now to have a clear light in which things that moved in the wild could be seen from far away. The wind had been turning through north to northwest during the night, and now it failed. The clouds vanished southward, and the sky was opened high and blue. As they stood upon the hillside, ready to depart, a pale sunlight gleamed over the mountain tops.
"We must reach the doors before sunset," said Gandalf, "or I fear we shall not reach them at all. It is not far, but our paths may be winding, for here Aragorn cannot guide us. He has seldom walked in this country, and only once have I been under the west wall of Moria. That was long ago."
"There it lies," he said, pointing away southeastwards to where the mountain sides fell sheer into the shadows at their feet. In the distance could be dimly seen a line of bare cliffs, and in their midst, taller than the rest, one great grey wall. "When we left the pass, I led you southward,
and not back to our starting point, as some of you may have noticed. It is well that I did so, for now we have several miles less to cross, and haste is needed. Let us go."
"I do not know which to hope," said Boromir grimly. "That Gandalf will find what he seeks, or that coming to the cliff we shall find the gates lost forever. All choices seem ill, and to be caught between wolves and the wall the likeliest chance. Lead on."
Let me just pause for water here.
Gimli now walked ahead by the wizard's side, so eager was he to come to Moria. Together they led the company back toward the mountains. The only road of old to Moria from the west had lain along the course of a stream, the Cyrano, that ran from the feet of the cliffs near where the doors had stood. But either Gandalf was astray, or else the land had changed in recent years, for he did not strike the stream where he looked to find it, only a few miles southwards from their start. The morning was passing towards noon, and still the company wandered and scrambled in barren country of red stones. Nowhere could they see any gleam of water or hear any sound of it. All was bleak and dry. Their hearts sank. They saw no living thing, and not a bird was in the sky. But what the night would bring if it caught them in that lost land, none of them cared to think. Suddenly Gimli, who had pressed on ahead, called back to them. He was standing on a knoll, and pointing to the right. It was empty and silent, and hardly a trickle of water flowed among the brown and red-stained stones of its bed. But on the near side there was a path, most broken and decayed, that wound its way among the ruined walls and paving stones of an ancient high-road.
"Ah, here it is at last," said Gandalf. "This is where the stream ran, Cyrano, the Gate Stream, they used to call it. But what has happened to the water, I cannot guess. It used to be swift and noisy. Come, we must hurry on, we are late."
The company were footsore and tired, but they trudged doggedly along the rough and winding track for many miles. The sun turned from the noon and began to go west. After a brief halt and a hasty meal, they went on again. Before them the mountains frowned, but their path lay in a deep trough of land that they could see only the higher shoulders and the far eastward peaks. At length they came to a sharp bend. There the road, which had been veering southward between the brink and the channel and a steep fall of the land to the left, turned and went due east again. Rounding the corner they saw before them a low cliff some 5 fathoms high, with a broken and jagged top. Over it a trickling water dripped through a wide cleft that seems to have been carved out by a fall that had once been strong and full.
"Indeed things have changed," said Gandalf. "But there is no mistaking the place. There is all that remains of the stair falls. If I remember right, there was a flight of steps cut in the rock at their side, but the main road wound away left and climbed with several loops up to the level ground to the top. There used to be a shallow valley beyond the falls right here to the walls of Moria, and the Cyrano flowed through it with the road beside it. Let us go and see what things are like now."
They found the stone steps without difficulty, and Gimli sprang swiftly up them, followed by Gandalf and Frodo. When they reached the top, they saw that they could go no further that way, and the reason for the drying up of the gate stream was revealed. Behind them, the sinking sun filled the cool western sky with glimmering gold. Before them stretched a dark, still lake. Neither sky nor sunset were reflected in its sullen surface. The Cyrano had been dammed and had filled all the valley. Beyond the ominous water were reared vast cliffs, their stern faces pallid in the fading light, final and impassable. No sign or gate or entrance, not a fissure or crack could Frodo see in the frowning stone.
"There are the walls of Moria," said Gandalf, pointing across the water. "And there the gate stood once upon a time, the elven door at the end of the road from Holland by which we have come. But this way is blocked. None of the company, I guess, will wish to swim this gloomy water at the end of the day. It has an unwholesome look." "We might find way round the northern edge," said Gimli. "The first thing for the company to do is to climb up by the main path and see where that will lead us. Even if there were no lake, we could not get our baggage pony up this stair." "But in any case we cannot take the poor beast into the mines," said Gandalf. "The road under the mountains is a dark road, and there are places narrow and steep which he cannot tread even if we can." "Poor old Bill," said Frodo. I had not thought of that. And poor Sam, I wonder what he will say. I'm sorry, said Gandalf. Poor Bill has been a useful companion, and it goes to my heart to turn him adrift now. I would have travelled lighter and brought no animal, least of all this one that Sam is fond of, if I had my way. I feared all along that we should be obliged to take this road.
All right, so to pause here, the thing that I really want to talk about here is one question that comes up a lot on Quora specifically is why the so-called riddle, it's not really a riddle, it's more like instructions, but the words on the doors of Durin are written in Sindarin, which is an Elvish language, and not in either the common tongue or a dwarf language. And of course the dwarves have their own language. It's called Khazad-dum, and they keep it a secret. They don't really share it with others. Gimli gave us a little bit of Khazad-dum when he talked about what each mountain was named and then what the Elvish equivalent of each name was, such as Zirak-Zagil being called Celebdil by the elves. And of course, we're going to talk a little bit more about Zirak-Zagil later on, because it's an important point. But what we have here is Gandalf basically answering that question before it even comes up. He calls this particular door, and this is not the only door into Moria. It's one of the most well-known ones. It's one that we know isn't blocked up or lost forever. But he says specifically here, where is it? The elven door at the end of the road from Holland. So Holland is this place that they had gone through. And hey, Wayne, how's it going? And I had mentioned last time that Holland by the elves is called Eregion. And this was the land of Lord Celebrimbor, the one who made many of the rings of power, along with Anatar, who turned out to be Sauron, but of course he didn't know that. And then it was later destroyed, and it's no longer there. And what elves were from Eregion that survived have either passed to the west or gone to live elsewhere. There was that bizarre point where Legolas basically talked to a bunch of rocks, But anyway, what's interesting here is that this is an elven land, and it was made specifically by Celebrimbor as a vassal state of Lindon because he wanted to be near the dwarves. It was specifically created to be near Moria, which was called Khazad-dum at the time, because he was friends with dwarves, and he wanted to learn from the dwarves, and they wanted to learn from him and just be in friendship with each other. So essentially, the doors of Durin, the ones that have, the pedo melon on it, telling you speak friend, it's basically the elvish entrance to Moria, and that's why the language reflected on the doors of Durin is Sindarin Elvish and not something that, that the dwarves would speak on their own, or that might be more common, like Westron, the common speech. The day was drawing to its end, and cold stars were glinting in the sky high above the sunset, when the company, with all the speed they could, climbed up the slopes and reached the side of the lake. In breadth it looked to be no more than 2 or 3 furlongs at the widest point. How far it stretched away southward they could not see in the failing light, but its northern end was no more than 1/2 a mile from where they stood, and between the stony ridges that enclosed the valley and the water's edge there was a rim of open ground. They hurried forward, for they had still a mile or 2 left to go before they could reach the point on the far shore that Gandalf was making for. And then he still had to find the doors. When they came to the northernmost corner of the lake, they found a narrow creek that barred their way. It was green and stagnant, thrust out like a slimy arm towards the enclosing hills. Gimli strode forward undeterred and found that the water was shallow, no more than ankle deep at the edge. Behind him they walked in file, threading their way with care, for under the weedy pools were sliding and greasy stones, and footing was treacherous. Frodo shuddered with disgust at the touch of the dark, unclean water on his feet. Now, I want to point out again, I talked about this last time, and I have to just sort of revisit this thought. Frodo is, as hobbits usually are, completely barefoot here, and he's feeling this slimy, disgusting, stagnant water on his feet and he's grossed out by it. Tolkien actually did consider the idea that in being kitted out for the journey from Rivendell to Moria, that they would be given some boots, and this would explain how the hobbits were able to go through places like Carathris in the snow and the Dead Marshes later on. And he decided against it. It was one of those sort of things that may have come up in a revision that never got fully implemented, because if he had revised that, then he would have had to revise a great number of other things. You know, when you change something early on in the work, it sort of has this domino effect on everything else. So this is one of those things that he never really got to fix in his own, sort of thought. And I've explained that Tolkien, he was never satisfied with any story that he came out. As a matter of fact, his little short story, Leaf by Nigel, which is his only allegory, about a painter trying to finish a painting and just being distracted by other things, is the only story that Tolkien ever wrote that he considered to be finished. So, he didn't consider The Hobbit to be finished. He wanted to rewrite it. He was talked out of it, and he did revise parts of it from, the first draft the first edition, I should say, going into the revised edition, but he wanted to rewrite the whole thing from scratch and make it a little bit more like The Lord of the Rings in its writing tone. The Lord of the Rings, of course, as I mentioned earlier, he said it was too short, it was unsatisfying in its length, and not detailed enough, which we'd laugh at this 1,200-page book that's full of so much detail, and then the author said it should have been longer and more detailed. That's just sort of funny. But this is how he felt, And then, of course, all of his other stories, the three earliest stories that he wrote when he was in the hospital with trench fever, Beren and Luthien, and the Fall of Gondolin, and the Children of Húrin. Beren and Luthien and the Fall of Gondolin went through many, many, many revisions, many versions. And the Children of Húrin, he didn't really revise so much, but he never really finished it. The version that you can get as a novel, I would say, is like 95% finished. You can tell there's sections which are a little undetailed that he would have liked to have gone back and write more detail on. So C.S. Lewis once said that Tolkien was a perfectionist and a procrastinator. So he would put things off, and we see this in Leaf by Nigel, his only finished work, in his opinion, of being a perfectionist and being a procrastinator. One day we'll have to read Leaf by Nigel. It's a really wonderful story that explains Tolkien's whole thought process. Ironically, he explains his thought process allegorically while railing against the idea of using allegory, but this was the only time he decided to use it. As Sam, the last of the company, led Bill up on the dry ground on the far side, there came a soft sound, a swish followed by a plop, as if a fish had disturbed the still surface of the water. Turning quickly, they saw ripples, black-edged with shadow in the waning light. Great rings were widening outward from a point far out on the lake. There was a bubbling noise, and then silence. The dusk deepened, and the last gleams of the sunset were veiled in cloud. Gandalf now pressed on at a great pace, and the others followed as quickly as they could. They had reached the strip of dry land between the lake and the cliffs. It was narrow, often hardly a dozen yards across, and encumbered with fallen rock and stones, but they found a way, hugging the cliff, and keeping as far from the dark water as they might. A mile southward along the shore they came upon holly trees. Stumps and dead boughs were rotting in the shadows, the remains, it seemed, of old thickets, or of a hedge that had once lined the road across the drowned valley. But close under the cliff there stood, still strong and living, 2 tall trees, larger than any trees of holly that Frodo had ever seen or imagined. Their great roots spread from the wall to the water. Under the looming cliffs they had looked like mere bushes, but when seen far off from the top of the stair, now they towered overhead, stiff, dark, and silent, throwing deep night shadows about their feet, standing like sentinel pillars at the end of the road. "Well, here we are at last," said Gandalf. "Here the elven way from Holland ended. Holly was the token of the people of that land, and they planted it here to mark the end of their domain, for the west door was made chiefly for their use in the traffic with the lords of Moria.
Those were happier days, when there was still close friendship at times between folk of different race, even between dwarves and elves. It was not the fault of the dwarves that the friendship waned, said Gimli.
I have not heard that it was the fault of the elves, said Legolas.
I have heard both, said Gandalf. And I will not give judgment now, but I beg you to, Legolas and Gimli, at least be friends and to help me. I need you both. The doors are shut and hidden, and the sooner we find them the better. Night is at hand.
Turning to the others, he said, While I am searching, will you each make ready to enter the mines? For here I fear we must say farewell to our good beast of burden. You must lay aside much of the stuff that we brought against bitter weather. You will not need it inside, nor, I hope, when we come through in the journey on down in the south. Instead, each of us must take a share of what the pony carried, especially the food and the water skins.
But you can't leave poor old Bill behind in this forsaken place, Mr. Gandalf, cried Sam, angry and distressed. I won't have it, and that's that. After all, he has come so far and all.
I am sorry, Sam, said the wizard. But when the door opens, I do not think you will be able to drag your Bill inside into the long dark of Moria. You will have to choose between Bill and your master.
He'd follow Mr. Frodo into a dragon's den if I let him, protested Sam. It'd be nothing short of murder to turn him loose with all those wolves about.
It will be short of murder, I hope, said Gandalf.
He laid his hand on the pony's head and spoke in a low voice.
Go with words of God guiding on you, he said. You are a wise beast and have learned much in Rivendell. Make your ways to places where you can find grass, and so come in time to Elrond's house, or wherever you wish to go. There, Sam. He will have quite as much chance of escaping wolves and getting home as we have.
Sam stood sullenly by the pony and returned no answer. Bill, seeming to understand well what was going on, nuzzled up to him, putting his nose to Sam's ear. Sam burst into tears and fumbled with the straps, unlading all the pony's packs and throwing them on the ground. The others sorted out the goods, making a pile of all that could be left behind and dividing up the rest. When this was done, they turned to watch Gandalf. He appeared to have done nothing. He was standing between the two trees, gazing at the blank wall of the cliff, as if he would be able to bore a hole into it with his eyes. Gimli was wandering about, tapping the stone here and there with his axe. Legolas was pressed against the rock, as if listening.
Well, here we are and all ready, said Merry. But where are the doors? I can't see any signs of them.
Dwarf doors are not meant to be seen when shut, said Gimli. They are invisible, and their own masters cannot find them or open them if their secret is forgotten.
But this door was not meant to be a secret known only to dwarves, said Gandalf, coming suddenly to life and turning round. Unless things are altogether changed, eyes that know what to look for may discover the signs. He walked toward the wall. Right between the shadow of the trees there was a smooth space, and over this he passed his hands to and fro, muttering words under his breath. Then he stepped back. "Look," he said. "Can you see anything now?" The moon now shone upon the grey face of the rock, but they could not see anything else for a while. Then slowly on the surface, where the wizard's hands had passed, faint lines appeared, like slender veins of silver running in the stone. At first they were no more than pale gossamer threads, so fine that they only twinkled fitfully where the moon caught them. But steadily they grew broader and clearer until their design could be guessed. At the top, as high as Gandalf could reach, was an arch of interlacing letters in an elvish character. Below, though the threads were in places blurred or broken, the outline could be seen of an anvil and hammer, surrounded by a crown with 7 stars. Beneath these again were 2 trees, each bearing crescent moons. More clearly than all else there shone forth in the middle of the door a single star with many rays. Okay, so let's talk about this. As a matter of fact, I would like to get the design of the doors of Durin here up on the screen if I could. Let's see. Oh, I just have to go to that section. All right, here we are, Book 2, Chapter 4. Okay.
because this is, I mean, I could actually just hold it up, but you won't be able to make out the details there. And we really want to see the details. So let's show this here. And yeah, so we can see here, this is the Feanorian letters, or Tengwar, as it's called. And there is a translation. Here is written in the Feanorian characters, according to the mode of Beleriand, Eren Duran Atan Moria Pedo Melanamino, in Narvi, Hein Akant Celebrimbor Regian, Thaitan de Thuem. And Gandalf will tell you the translation of that in just a minute. But what's really interesting here is we have the 7 stars. And I mentioned this a few streams ago. The 7 stars represent a constellation that we would call the Big Dipper. But in Middle-earth, every culture has a different name for it. It is sometimes called the Wain, or the Bear, or the Valakirka, which is sickle of the Valar. The dwarves call it Durin's Crown, and you can see the crown there, and the hammer and anvil. But then, of course, there's the elvish aspect of it. This is actually the Star of Feanor, of the House of Feanor, because Celebrimbor made these doors, as you can see. So it's really interesting. We also get an idea of the size of these dwarves, and a lot of people ask a lot of times, how could goods be brought into Moria through such a tiny door? Because the very top arch is as high as Gandalf could reach, and although Gandalf sometimes seems to grow in stature to a great height, as we saw when he fought the wargs just a little while ago, he is generally, I think, like around 5'4", average height of a normal person, not as tall as, say, Aragorn or even Boromir. So yeah, it's the top of it is just enough where he can just reach that, So it's not very large. And I always tell people, well, like I said, and I said this earlier, this is not the only entrance to Moria. This is just one that we know of, that is accessible, that we can find. There were probably a lot of entrances to Moria, including what we might call fright entrances to bring goods into. So that's important to talk about as well. All right, let's continue here.
"There are the emblems of Durin," cried Gimli.
"And there is the tree of the High Elves," said Legolas.
"And the star of the House of Feanor," said Gandalf. "They are wrought of Ithildin, that mirrors only starlight and moonlight, and sleeps until it is touched by one who speaks words now long forgotten in Middle-earth. It is long since I heard them, and I thought deeply before I could recall them to my mind."
"But what does the writing say?" said Frodo, who was trying to decipher the inscription in the arch. "I thought I knew the elf letters, but I cannot read these."
"The words are in the elven tongue of the west of Middle-earth in the elder days," answered Gandalf. "But they do not say anything of importance to us. They say only, 'The doors of Durin, Lord of Moria. Speak, friend, and enter.' And underneath, small and faint, is written, 'I, Narvi, made them. Celebrimbor of Holland drew these signs.'"
"What does it mean by 'speak, friend, and enter'?" asked Merry.
"Well, that is plain enough," said Gimli. "If you are a friend, speak the password, and the doors will open, and you can enter." "Yes," said Gandalf. "These doors are probably governed by words. Some dwarf gates will only open at special times, or for particular persons, and some have locks and keys that are still needed when all necessary times and words are known. These doors have no keys. In the days of Durin they were not secret. They usually stood open, and door wards sat here. But if they were shut, any who knew the opening word could speak it and pass in. At least so it is recorded, is it not, Gimli?" "It is," said the dwarf. "But what is the word is not remembered. Narvi and his craft and all the kindred have vanished from the earth."
"But do you know not the word, Gandalf?" said Boromir in surprise.
"No," said the wizard.
The others looked dismayed. Only Aragorn, who knew Gandalf well, remained silent and unmoved. "Then what was the use of bringing us to this accursed spot?" cried Boromir, glancing back with a shudder at the dark water. You told us you had once passed through the mines. How could that be if you did not know how to enter?"
"The answer to your first question, Boromir," said the wizard, "is that I do not know the word yet, but we shall see soon. And," he added, with a glint in his eyes under the bristling brows, "you may ask what is the use of my deeds when they are proved useless. As for your other question, do you doubt my tale, or have you no wits left? I did not enter this way. I came from the east. If you wish to know, I will tell you, these doors open outward. From the inside you may thrust them open with your hands. From the outside nothing will move them, save the spell of command. They cannot be forced inwards."
"Then what are we going to do, then?" asked Pippin, undaunted by the wizard's bristling brows.
"Knock on the doors with your head, Peregrine Took," said Gandalf. "But if that does not shatter them, and I am allowed a little peace from foolish questions, I will seek for the opening words."
So, interesting little aside here. Gandalf sometimes can be a little short with Pippin. We see it a lot. And it has led to this sort of emetic spread of people just stating that, just Gandalf just really can't stand Pippin, and he's just really irritated by him. And this is one of those examples where, like, what are you going to do? I'm going to knock your head against the wall until it breaks, But really here is that Pippin just happened to speak at the wrong time. Gandalf's not really all that upset with what Pippin said. It's really Boromir that had him aggravated, and then Pippin just happened to sort of get caught in the crossfire there. And this next section here, I will be pausing briefly after I read it, is important for other reasons. I'm going to bring that up in a moment. Here it is. I once knew every spell in all the tongues of elves or men or orcs that was ever used for such a purpose. I can still remember 10 score of them without searching in my mind. But only a few trials, I think, will be needed, and I shall not have to call on Gimli for words of the secret dwarf tongue that they teach to none. The opening words were elvish, like the writing on the arch, that seems certain." He stepped up to the rocks again and lightly touched with staff on the silver star in the middle, neath the sign of the anvil. "Anon ethelen edroanen, Fennis Nogothrim Laster Bethlamen," he said in a commanding voice. The silver lines faded, but the blank gray stone did not stir. So, what's interesting here is a lot of people assume that only elves really have magic, that men don't have magic, dwarves don't have magic, goblins certainly don't have magic. But here is Gandalf saying quite the opposite. He once knew every spell in all the tongues of elves or men or orcs. Every race has its own magic. Even at the start of The Hobbit, when hobbits are sort of explained as to have no magic, it is stated except for what is called everyday magic, which is their ability to sort of be silent and to move quickly and quietly, natural sort of stealth. And we've talked about this particularly on the Council of Tolkien, about magic being a word that essentially means a trait that you may have that somebody else may not have. And when we get to the Lothlorien chapter, Galadriel has a bit to say about the idea of magic being something that elves do, because elves will say, "We don't do magic. What are you talking about?" And we'll talk about that more when we get to the Lothlorien chapter. But here we see that, yes, there are spells that are man spells, there are spells that are orc spells, certainly. And Gandalf knew them all at one point. Many times he repeated these words in different order or varied them. Then he tried other spells, one after another, speaking now faster and louder, now soft and slow. Then he spoke many single words of elvish speech. Nothing happened. The cliff towered into the night. The countless stars were kindled, the wind blew cold, and the doors stood fast. Again Gandalf approached the wall, and lifting up his arms, he spoke in tones of command and rising wrath. "Edro, Edro!" he cried, and struck the rock with his staff. "Open! Open!" he shouted, and followed it with the same command in every language that had ever been spoken in the west of Middle-earth. Then he threw his staff on the ground and sat down in silence. At that moment, from far off, the wind bore to their listening ears the howling of wolves. Bill the pony started in fear, and Sam sprang to his side and whispered softly to him. "Do not let him run away," said Boromir. "It seems that we shall need him still if the wolves do not find us. How I hate this foul pool!" He stooped, and picking up a large stone, he cast it far into the dark water. The stone vanished with a soft slap, but at the same instant there was a swish and a bubble. Great rippling rings formed on the surface out beyond where the stone had fallen, and they moved slowly toward the foot of the cliff. "Why did you do that, Boromir?" said Frodo. "I hate this place too, and I am afraid. I don't know of what, not of wolves or the dark behind the doors, but of something else. I am afraid of the pool. Don't disturb it." "I wish we could get away," said Merry. "Why doesn't Gandalf do something quick?" said Pippin. Gandalf took no notice of them. He sat with his head bowed, rather in despair or in anxious thought. The mournful howling of the wolves was heard again. The ripples in the water grew and came closer, and some were already lapping on the shore. With a suddenness that startled them all, the wizard sprang to his feet. He was laughing. "I have it!" he cried. Of course, of course. Absurdly simple, like most riddles when you see the answer." Picking up his staff, he stood before the rock and said in a clear voice, "Melon." The star shone out briefly and faded again. Then, silently, a great doorway was outlined, though not a crack or joint had been visible before. Slowly it divided in the middle and swung outward, inch by inch, until both doors lay back against the wall. Through the opening a shadowy stair could be seen climbing steeply up, but beyond the lower steps the darkness was deeper than the night. The company stared in wonder. "I was wrong after..." Oh, sorry, I was doing Gimli. "I was wrong after all," said Gandalf. "And Gimli too. Merry of all people was on the right track. The opening word was inscribed on the archway all the time. The translation should have been, 'Say, friend, and enter.' I had only to speak the elvish word for friend, and the doors opened. Quite simple. Too simple for a learned law-master in these suspicious days. Those were happier times. Now let us go." So, what I've always found amusing about this is Frodo asks him what the doors say, and he translates it for him, slightly incorrectly as we now learn, but if he had read it out in Sindarin, the doors would have just burst open. And what amuses me the most about that sort of hypothetical scenario of Gandalf just reading it out in Sindarin before translating it, and the doors just opening, is he wouldn't know why. It would probably bother him greatly as to why the doors opened. He strode forward and set his foot on the lowest step, but at that moment several things happened. Frodo felt something seize him by the ankle, and he fell with a cry. Bill the pony gave a wild neigh of fear and turned tail and dashed away along the lakeside into the darkness. Sam leaped after him, then hearing Frodo's cry he ran back again, weeping and cursing. The others swung round and saw the waters of the lake seething as if a host of snakes was swimming up from the southern end. Yes, Open Sesame. The reference of Open Sesame is interesting because it's from Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. And what's interesting there is of remembering a password, and he doesn't remember it's Open Sesame. He remembers open and that it's the name of a seed, and at some point he's going through like pretty much every seed you can think of before he finally figures out Sesame. Out from the water a long, sinuous tentacle had crawled. It was pale green and luminous and wet. Its fingered end had held of Frodo's foot and was dragging him into the water. Sam, on his knees, was now slashing at it with a knife. The arm let go of Frodo, and Sam pulled him away, crying out for help. 20 other arms came rippling out. The dark water boiled, and there was a hideous stench. "Into the gateway! Up the stairs! Quick!" shouted Gandalf, leaping back. Rousing them from the horror that seemed to have rooted all but Sam to the ground where they stood, he drove them forward. They were just in time. Sam and Frodo were only a few steps up, and Gandalf had just begun to climb when the groping tentacles writhed across the narrow shore and fingered the cliff wall and the doors. One came wriggling out over the threshold, glistening in the starlight. Gandalf turned and paused. If he was considering what word would close the gate again from within, there was no need. Many coiling arms seized the doors on either side, and with a horrible strength swung them round. With a shattering echo they slammed, and all light was lost. A noise of rending and crashing came dully through the ponderous stone. Sam, clinging to Frodo's arm, collapsed on a step in the black darkness. "Poor old Bill," he said in a choking voice. "Poor old Bill. Wolves and snakes. But the snakes were too much for him. I had to choose, Mr. Frodo. I had to come with you." They heard Gandalf go back down the steps and thrust his staff against the doors. There was a quiver in the stone, and the stairs trembled, but the doors did not open.
"Oh, well," said the wizard. "The passage is blocked behind us now, and there is only one way out, on the other side of the mountains. I fear from the sounds that boulders have been piled up and the trees uprooted and thrown across the gate. I'm sorry, for the trees were beautiful, and had stood so long."
"I felt that something horrible was near from the moment that my foot first touched the water," said Frodo. "What was the thing? Or were there many of them?"
"I do not know," answered Gandalf. "But the arms were all guided by one purpose. Something has crept or has been driven out of the dark waters under the mountains. There are older and fouler things than orcs in the deep places of the world."
He did not speak aloud his thoughts, that whatever it was that dwelt in the lake, it had seized on Frodo first among all the company. Boromir muttered under his breath, but the echoing stone magnified the sound to a hoarse whisper that all could hear. "In the deep places of the world, and thither we are going against my wish. Who will lead us now in this deadly dark?"
"I will," said Gandalf, "and Gimli shall walk with me. Follow my staff."
As the wizard passed on ahead up the great steps, he held up his staff aloft, and from its tip there came a faint radiance. The wide stairway was sound and undamaged. 200 steps they counted, broad and shallow, and at the top they found an arched passage with a level floor leading on into the dark.
"Let us sit and rest and have something to eat here on the landing, since we can't find a dining room."
Oh, sorry, this is Frodo. This is Frodo. I'm doing Gandalf's voice. "Let us sit and rest and have something to eat here on the landing, since we can't find a dining room," said Frodo. He had begun to shake off the terror of the clutching arm, and suddenly he felt extremely hungry. The proposal was welcomed by all, and they sat down on the upper steps, dim figures in the gloom. After they had eaten, Gandalf gave them each a third sip of the Mirovor of Rivendell.
"It will not last much longer, I am afraid," he said. "But I think we'll need it after the horror at the gate. And unless we have great luck, we shall need all that is left before we see the other side. Go carefully with the water, too. There are many streams and wells in the mines, but they should not be touched. We may not have a chance of filling our skins in bottles till we come down to the Dimril Dale."
How long is that going to take up?" asked Frodo.
"I cannot say," answered Gandalf. "It depends on many chances, but going straight without mishap or losing our way, we shall take 3 or 4 marches, I expect. It cannot be less than 40 miles from West Door to Eastgate in a direct line, and the road may wind much."
You know, Chewie, earlier on, Alice had done something very similar. It was a different lip emote, but had done something very similar with my Eye of Sauron emotes there with the mouth between it. Yours is sort of like more of a snarly sort of lip, though. I wonder if there's an emote of a flaming lip. That would be interesting. After only a brief rest, they started on their way again. All were eager to get the journey over as quickly as possible, and were willing, tired as they were, to go on marching still for several hours. Gandalf walked in front as before. In his left hand he held up his glimmering staff, the light of which just showed the ground before his feet. In his right he held his sword, Glamdring. Behind him came Gimli, his eyes glinting in the dim light as he turned his head from side to side. Behind the dwarf walked Frodo, and he had drawn his short sword Sting. No gleam came from the blades of Sting or of Glamdring, and that was some comfort, for being the work of elvish smiths in the elder days, these swords shone with a cold light if any orcs were near at hand. Behind Frodo went Sam, and after him Legolas and the young hobbits and Boromir. In the dark at the rear, grim and silent, walked Aragorn. The passage twisted round a few turns and then began to descend. It went steadily down for a long while before it became level once again. The air grew hot and stifling, but it was not foul, and at times they felt currents of cooler air upon their faces, issuing from half-guessed openings in the walls. There were many of these. In the pale ray of the wizard's staff, Frodo caught glimpses of stairs and arches, and of other passages and tunnels, sloping up or running steeply down, or opening blankly dark on either side. It was bewildering beyond hope of remembering. Gimli aided Gandalf very little, except by his stout courage. At least he was not, as were most of the others, troubled by the mere darkness in itself. Often the wizard consulted him at points where their choice of way was doubtful, but it was always Gandalf who had the final word. The mines of Moria were vast and intricate beyond the imagination of Gimli Gloin's son, a dwarf of the mountain race though he was. To Gandalf the far-off memories of a journey long before were now of little help, but even in the gloom, and despite all the windings of the road, he knew whither he wished to go, and he did not falter, at least as there was a path that led him towards his goal. "Do not be afraid," said Aragorn. There was a pause longer than usual, and Gandalf and Gimli were whispering together. The others were crowded behind him, waiting anxiously. "Do not be afraid. I have been with him on many a journey, if never on one so dark, and there are tales of Rivendell, of greater deeds of his than any I have seen. He will not go astray. If there is any path to find, he has led us in here against our fears, but he will lead us out again, at whatever cost to himself. He is surer of finding the way home in blind night than the cats of Queen Beruthiel." You made something and sent it to me to look at later? Okay. Now, I wanted to talk about Queen Beruthiel because this is sort of a random reference that Aragorn makes. So, Queen Beruthiel is a reference to a queen of Gondor from before, Aragorn's time, obviously back when there were still kings. So she was the king's wife, Beruthiel. And she was a keeper of many cats that she would send out as spies. And it's just sort of this really sort of random thing that there was this sort of wicked queen in Gondor that had cats that would spy on people. And you might wonder to yourself, what is the point of all that? And it sort of harkens back to the mind of Tolkien, really, is that he really didn't like cats. He did not care for cats. He was, as far as pets go, he was more of a dog person than a cat person. He did write a poem called Cat, and eventually he did get a cat for his family, and he sort of came around on them. But there's a lot of references. Queen Beruthiel is one of them, that she was sort of this wicked cat lady that was a queen of Gondor that would send the cats out to do mischief and to spy on people and to whisper their secrets back to her so that she would know, like, sort of what everybody is up to. And in the earliest versions of Beren and Luthien, which he started writing in 1917, when he was in the hospital. He just had to meet the right cat. There you go. When he was in the hospital with trench fever. And Beren and Luthien is really a story of J.R.R. Tolkien and Edith, his wife. I just saw what you sent me. There it is. Oh, wow. The green screen does not like that. Let's just put that back. It's a flaming lip emote. But anyway, Beren and Luthien as a story, one of the, obviously the main antagonist of it is Melkor. Back then he was called Melko. And his main henchman was not yet called Sauron. Before he was Sauron, he was Thu the Necromancer. And before Thu the Necromancer came off, there was a giant cat named Tevildo. And Wayne said it in the Twitch chat there, Tevildo's House of Cats, which was a song by a metal band, and I won't name the name of them because it's not safe for YouTube really, but they had an album which also I can't say the name of, but the word Tolkien was in there, and all of the songs were references to some very obscure references to
to Tolkien's, and one of them was called Tevildo's House of Cats. And I remember me and Wayne were talking once, and we came across that, and I explained Tevildo as sort of like the original version of Sauron, or rather the character that would evolve into Sauron later in his mind. And there is this whole cat versus dog theme going on in Beren and Luthien, because of course you have the evil prince of cats, Tevildo, and then the noble hound of the Valar, Huan. And Huan stayed in the story, but Tevildo did not. He was replaced by Sauron. And of course then we see Beruthiel. There were a few other references to cats that showed that Tolkien did not really care for them all that well. In one of his letters, actually, and I'd like to bring up the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien here and find this part, because there was somebody had sent Tolkien a letter stating about naming cats, specifically, I believe, Siamese cats, after his characters. Here it is. Okay, so this is letter 219, which is in reply to a letter from Allen and Unwin on the 14th of October, 1959. A Cambridge cat breeder had asked if she could register a litter of Siamese kittens under names taken from The Lord of the Rings. And this is probably his shortest letter, because it's only a single sentence. And I think the only reason that it was published was because it was funny. And this is what Tolkien wrote. My only comment is that of Puck upon mortals. I fear to me that Siamese cats belong to the fauna of Mordor, but you need not tell the cat breeder that. So, yeah. So he's just like, oh, cats. Especially, he seems to have like a real, like he says specifically Siamese cats are the fauna of Mordor. They're native to an evil place, which is kind of funny. I think that's the only reason. It's a short letter. It's only a single sentence there. The only reason it was, I think, published is because it's funny. But it just shows that he really had some strong feelings about cats at one point. And you see Gondor. You see Aragorn making a reference to a queen of Gondor named Beruthiel, who was said to have a bunch of cats that she used for sort of, I wouldn't say evil, but perhaps wicked purposes. All right, where were we? Let's see. It was well for the company that they had such a guide. They had no fuel nor any means of making torches. In the desperate scramble at the doors, many things had been left behind, but without any light they would soon have come to grief. There were not only many roads to choose from, there were also in many places holes and pitfalls, and dark wells beside the path in which their passing feet echoed. There were fissures and chasms in the walls and floors, and every now and then a crack would open right before their feet. The widest was more than 7 feet across, and it was long before Pippin could summon enough courage to leap over the dreadful gap. The noise of churning water came up from far below, as if some great mill wheel was turning in the depths. "Rope," muttered Sam. "I knew I'd want it if I hadn't got it." As these dangers became more frequent, their march became slower. Already they seemed to have been tramping on, endlessly into the mountain's roots. They were more than weary, and yet there seemed no comfort in the thought of halting anywhere. Frodo's spirits had risen for a while after his escape, and after food and a draught of the cordial. But now a deep uneasiness, growing to a dread, crept over him again. Though he had been healed in Rivendell of the knife stroke, that grim wound had not been without effect. His senses were sharper and more aware of things that could not be seen. One sign of change he had noticed was that he could see more in the dark than any of his companions, save perhaps Gandalf. And he was in any case the bearer of the ring. It hung upon its chain against his breast, and whiles it seemed a heavy weight. He felt the certainty of evil ahead and of evil following, but he said nothing. He gripped tighter on the hilt of his sword and went on doggedly. The company behind him spoke seldom and only in hurried whispers. There was no sound but the sound of their own feet, the dull stump of Gimli's dwarf boots, the heavy tread of Boromir, the light step of Legolas, the soft, scarce-heard patter of hobbit feet, and in the rear the slow, firm footfalls of Aragorn with his long stride. When they halted for a moment they heard nothing at all, unless it were occasionally a faint trickle and drip of unseen water. Yet Frodo began to hear, or to imagine that he heard, something else, like the faint fall of soft, bare feet. It was never loud enough or near enough for him to feel certain that he heard it. But once it had started, it never stopped while the company was moving. But it was not an echo, for when they halted, it pattered on for a little all by itself, and then grew still. I don't think I need to tell you that that's Gollum following them, but it's worthy of mentioning that I said this is why it was incredibly important that they go through Moria, no matter how bad or terrible it is, because Gollum is so important to the story's conclusion that without him, Sauron certainly wins, and all comes to ruin. So, yeah, very important that they go through Moria. It was after nightfall when they had entered the mines. They had been going for several hours with only brief halts when Gandalf came to his first serious check. Before him stood a wide, dark arch opening into 3 passages, all led in the same general direction, eastwards, but the left-hand passage plunged down, while the right-hand climbed up, and the middle way seemed to run on, smooth and level but very narrow.
"I have no memory of this place at all," said Gandalf, standing uncertainly under the arch. He held up his staff in the hope of finding some marks or inscription that might help his choice, but nothing of the kind was to be seen.
"I am too weary to decide," he said, shaking his head, "and I expect that you are all as weary as I am, or wearier. We had better halt here for what is left of the night. You know what I mean. In here it is ever dark, but outside the late moon is rising westward, and the middle night has passed."
"Poor old Bill," said Sam. "I wonder where he is. I hope those wolves hadn't got him yet." To the left of the great arch they found a stone door. It was half closed, but swung back easily to a gentle thrust. Beyond there seemed to lie a wide chamber cut in the rock.
"Steady, steady!" cried Gandalf as Merry and Pippin pushed forward, glad to find a place where they could rest, at least more feeling of shelter than in the open passage. "Steady! You do not know what is inside yet. I will go first."
He went in cautiously, and the others filed behind.
"There,"
he said, pointing with his staff to the middle of the floor. Before his feet they saw a large round hole, like the mouth of a well. Broken and rusty chains lay at the edge and trailed down into the black pit. Fragments of stone lay near.
"One of you might have fallen in and still be wondering when you are going to strike the bottom."
Oh, sorry, this is Aragorn, see? "One of you might have fallen in and still be wondering when you were going to strike the bottom," said Aragorn to Merry. "Let the guide go first when you have one."
"This seems to have been a guard room, made for the watching of the 3 passages," said Gimli. "That hole was plainly a well for the guards' use, covered with a stone lid, but the lid is broken, and we must all take care in the dark."
Pippin felt curiously attracted by the well. While the others were unrolling blankets and making beds against the walls in the chamber as far as possible from the hole in the floor, he crept over to the edge and peered over. A chill air seemed to strike his face, rising from invisible depths. Moved by a sudden impulse, he groped for a loose stone and let it drop. He felt his heart beat many times before there was any sound. Then far below, as if the stone had fallen into deep water, in some cavernous place, there came a plunk, very distant but magnified and repeated in the hollow shaft.
"What's that?"
cried Gandalf. He was relieved when Pippin confessed what he had done, but he was angry, and Pippin could see his eye glinting.
"Fool of a took!" he growled. "This is a serious journey, not a hobbit walking party. Throw yourself in next time, and you will be no further nuisance. Now be quiet."
Nothing more was heard for several minutes, but then there came out of the depths faint knocks. Tom-tap, tom-tap. They stopped, and when the echoes had died away, they were repeated, tap-tom, tom-tap, tap-tap-tom. They sounded disquietly like signals of some sort, but after a while knocking died away and was not heard again.
"That was the sound of a hammer, or I have never heard one," said Gimli.
"Yes," said Gandalf, "and I do not like it.
It may have nothing to do with Peregrine's foolish stone, but probably something has been disturbed that would have been left better quiet. Pray do nothing of the kind again. Let us hope we shall get some rest without further trouble. You, Pippin, can go on the first watch as a reward," he growled, as he rolled himself in a blanket. Pippin sat miserably by the door in the pitch dark, but he kept on turning round, fearing that some unknown thing would crawl up out of the well. He wished he could cover the hole, if only with a blanket, but he dared not move or go near it, even though Gandalf seemed to be asleep. Actually, Gandalf was awake, though lying still and silent. He was deep in thought, trying to recall every memory of his former journey in the mines, and considering anxiously the next course that he should take. A false turn now might be disastrous. After an hour he rose up and came over to Pippin. "Get into a corner and have a sleep, my lad," he said in a kindly tone. "You want to sleep, I expect. I cannot get a wink, so I might as well do the watching." "I know what is the matter with me," he muttered as he sat down by the door. "I need smoke. I have not tasted it since the morning before the snowstorm." The last thing that Pippin saw as sleep took him was a dark glimpse of the old wizard huddled on the floor, shielding a glowing chip in his gnarled hands between his knees. The flicker for a moment showed his sharp nose in the puff of smoke. It was Gandalf who roused them all from sleep. He had sat and watched all alone for about 6 hours, and had let the others rest. "And in the watches I have made up my mind," he said. "I do not like the feel of the middle way, and I do not like the smell of the left-hand way. There is a foul air down there, or I am no guide. I shall take the right-hand passage. It is time we began to climb up again." For 8 dark hours, not counting 2 brief halts, they marched on, and they met no danger and heard nothing, and saw nothing but the faint gleam of the wizard's light bobbing like a will-o'-the-wisp in front of them. The passage they had chosen wound steadily upwards. As far as they could judge, it went in great mounting curves. As it rose, it grew loftier and wider. There were now no openings to other galleries or tunnels on either side, and the floor was level and sound, without pits or cracks. Evidently they had struck what had once been an important road, and they went forward quicker than they had done on their first march. In this way they advanced some 15 miles, measured in a direct line east, though they must have actually walked 20 miles or more. As the road climbed upwards, Frodo's spirits rose a little, but he still felt oppressed, and still at times he heard, or thought he heard, away behind the company, and beyond the fall and patter of their feet, a following footstep that was not an echo. They had marched as far as the hobbits could endure without a rest, and all were thinking of a place where they could sleep, when suddenly the walls to right and left vanished. They seemed to have passed through some arched doorway into a black and empty space. There was a great draught of warmer air behind them, and before them the darkness was cold in their faces. They halted and crowded anxiously together. Gandalf seemed pleased. "I chose the right way," he said. "At last we are coming to the habitable parts, and I guess they are not now far from the eastern side, but we are high up, a good deal higher than the Dimril Gate, unless I am mistaken. From the feeling of the air, we must be in a wide hall. I will now risk a little real light." He raised his staff, and for a brief instant there was a blaze like a flash of lightning. Great shadows sprang up and fled, and for a second they saw a vast roof far above their heads, upheld by many mighty pillars hewn of stone. Before them and on either side stretched a huge empty hall, its black walls polished as smooth as glass, flashed and glittered. 3 other entrances they saw, dark black arches, one straight before them eastwards and one on either side. Then the light went out. "That is all I shall venture on for the present," said Gandalf. "There used to be great windows in the mountainside and shafts leading out to the light in the upper reaches of the mines. I think we have reached them now, but it is night outside again, and we cannot tell until morning. If I am right, tomorrow we may actually be able to see the morning peeping in. But in the meantime we had better go no further. Let us rest if we can. Things have gone well so far, and the greater part of the dark road is over. But we are not through yet, and it is a long way down to the gates that open on the world." Brief break for water here. Okay. I don't really have much to say here. Other than,
just maybe to look ahead and see how much we're going to get through. I think we're gonna finish this chapter for sure, and then I think we can get through the next chapter, which is the Bridge of Khazad-dum, which is a rather shorter chapter, and it'll be nice to get more than one chapter in a stream after several chapters, taking up entire streams. But Bridge of Khazad-dum, a lot happens, but it's rather short. The company spent that night in the great cavernous hall, huddled close together in a corner to escape the draught. There seemed to be a steady inflow of chill air through the eastern archway. All about them as they lay hung in the darkness, hollow and immense, and they were oppressed by the loneliness and vastness of the Dulven halls, and endlessly branching stairs and passages. The wildest imaginings that dark rumor had ever suggested to the hobbits fell altogether short of the actual dread and wonder of Moria. "There must have been a mighty crowd of dwarves here at one time," said Sam, "and every one of them busier than badgers for 500 years to make all this. And most in hard rock, too. What do they do it all for? They didn't live in these darksome holes, surely."
"These are not holes," said Gimli. "This is the great realm and city of the Dwarrodelf. And of old it was not darksome, but full of light and splendour, as is still remembered in our songs."
He rose, and standing in the dark, he began to chant in a deep voice, while the echoes ran away into the roof.
"The world was young, the mountains green, no stain yet on the moon was seen. No words were laid on stream or stone, when Durin woke and walked alone. He named the nameless halls and dells, he drank from yet untasted wells. He stooped and looked in Mirror, and saw a crown of stars appear, as gems upon a silver thread above the shadow of his head. The world was fair, the mountains tall, in elder days before the fall of mighty kings and Nargothrond and Gondolin, who now lay beyond. The western seas have passed away, the world was fair in Durin's day. A king he was on carven throne, in many pillar halls of stone, with golden roof and silver floor, and runes of power upon the door. The light of sun and star and moon, in shining lamps of crystal hewn, undimmed by cloud of shade or night, there shone forever fair and bright. Their hammer on the anvil smote, their chisel clove and graver wrote, their forge was blade and bound was hilt, the delver mine the mason built. Their beryl pearl and opal pale, and metal wrought like fish's mail, buckler and corselet, axe and sword, and shining spears were laid in hoard. Unwearied there were Durin's folk, beneath the mountains music woke. The harpers harped, the minstrels sang, and at the gates the trumpets rang. The world is grey, the mountains old, the forge is fire and ashen cold. No harp is rung, no hammer falls, the darkness dwells in Durin's halls. The shadow lies upon his tomb, in Moria, in Khazad-dum. But still the sunken stars appear, in dark and windless Mirror. There lies his crown in waters deep, till Durin wakes again from sleep.
Okay, so a few things to mention. First of all, one of the things that constantly comes up as an issue that people have with The Lord of the Rings is wondering, and we went past this part and I didn't really comment on it, was Pippin throwing that rock down the well, and people say, well, did that wake up the Balrog? And I always say, well, the Balrog wasn't sleeping. It was sleeping once, many, many thousands of years ago, and then it was awoken, and bad things happened. And that's why Moria is in the state that it's in. So it's not that Pippin awoke up the Balrog, and he certainly didn't alert anybody. Now, there was that hammer, the tum-tap, tum-tap, tum-tap. And then that stopped, And that very well could have been some form of communication. But I would point out that a stone falling into a well is hardly something that would really cause any of the orcs or the Balrog or any of these other creatures in Moria any sort of concern, because this place is falling apart. It was mentioned that as they were walking, cracks and fissures in the road were appearing right at their feet. There are probably rocks falling all the time. Moria is a ruin, a crumbling ruin. If anybody alerted them
It was Gimli right here by singing this song, and even specifically the language used here. Echoes ran away into the roof. And yeah, Moogle, you're right. There's a lot of rocks. There's a lot of rocks falling. So Gimli sings this song, and I want to talk about the actual lyrics, of course. But yeah, if anything alerted the enemy that they were there, it was certainly this, because he's singing this loud song, and his voice is echoing throughout the halls, and they are a lot closer to where the Balrog is than they were when Pippin threw that rock down the well. Keep in mind that they've been walking for 8 hours, almost straight up, so they're much closer to the other side. Now let's talk about the actual lyrics here. A few things. The Mirror is mentioned, and we're actually going to get to see the Mirror when they come out the other side. And Durin's crown, I mentioned the 7 stars on the door, the Valakirka. That Durin was one of the first dwarves. Now the way that the dwarves were created is really interesting, because they're not children of God like elves are, and like men are, but they're sort of they were created as these sort of homunculi by one of the Valar. His name was Aula, and he created a people that he called the dwarves, and he had 7 of them. Notice 7 stars, 7 fathers of the dwarves, and he was teaching them the language that he had come up for, which turned out to be Kuzdul, their secret language. And then God spoke to him, and he was sort of like, what have you done? What is going on? Why are you making guys? I make guys. You don't make guys. What is this all about? And Aula apologizes and says, look, I was just, kind of bored, and you made me to be a creator, so I'm creating, I'm a craftsman, and I didn't mean any disrespect. I'll bust them up, and the reason that Iluvatar, God, is speaking to Aula and questioning his motives is because he doesn't want him to be like Morgoth was, like Melkor. And he's saying, why did you create them? Because look, they don't have true life. Only I can give true life. They're your puppets. Is this what you wanted? You wanted puppets to do your will, but then to stand there idly without moving when your will is elsewhere? And he said, no, that's not what I was going for. And when he goes to strike these 7 original dwarves with a hammer and destroy them, they flinch and cringe from his hammer, which is not something that he told them to do, obviously. And God said, stay your hammer. Don't you see the way they react? Your wish was granted, even as it was spoken. And these were the 7 dwarves. And he had Aulite put them into a slumber to awaken at a later time, because he had a plan for when the elves would awaken and when the dwarves when the men would awaken. And now he's thinking, okay, I know when the dwarves are going to awaken. It's going to be sometime before the men, but after the elves. And there are actually not 7 original dwarves. There are actually 13, because it's not mentioned in the Silmarillion, but in the history of Middle-earth, that he also created 6 mothers of the dwarves. So there were 7 male and 6 female, and these were the original dwarves. And he put them side by side, 1 male and 1 female, in all these places. Now, you might notice 7's a bigger number than 6. I know, I can't get anything past you. And this is what Gimli mentioned in his song here. Durin awoke and walked alone. All of the dwarves had mates, the fathers of the dwarves, except for Durin. Obviously, he had to have gotten married at some point later on, but that had to come later. Now, he was also called Durin the Deathless, and there's sort of 2 reasons behind that. One is that he just never seemed to die. Like, dwarves generally live anywhere from 200 to 250 years of age. Some of them longer, some of them shorter. Gimli lives to be 262. One of the dwarves from The Hobbit, Dwalin, lived to be over, I think, 340 somewhat years old. Very, very old for a dwarf. Sort of like the equivalent of Bilbo living to be 131 years, except that was caused by the One Ring. Dwalin just, he must have been doing Pilates or something. But what we have with Durin, they called him the Deathless because he
we don't have an exact date for when he awoke. And we don't have an exact where the dwarf mother is also called Durin. No. I'm sure they all had names. Durin was just this one guy. What they were called the Khazad, which is their word for themselves. And hey, Guilherme, how's it going? I'm sorry, how do I say your name? Guilherme? Am I saying it right? I hope I am. Welcome in. So, we could only approximate how long Durin lived, because we don't know when exactly he awoke, and we don't know when exactly he died, but it's around 2,500 years old, which would make him essentially the oldest living mortal. Not counting the Nazgul, because they were sort of undead and extended by the rings and everything. But yeah, 2,500 years was his natural lifespan. And another reason that he's called Durin the Deathless was because he's the only dwarf that we know of that reincarnates. That he comes back, and for some reason, the dwarves are able to tell when a dwarf in his line is Durin. They can just see his spirit, and they name him Durin. And at this point, there have been 6 Durins. There will be 7 total. Durin the 7th, the last, who is not yet born at this point. He's going to be Dane the second, Ironfoot's grandson. Dane dies during the return of the king, and then his son Thorin the third Stonehelm becomes king, and then his son is Durin the 7th. Elvish is just fancy Portuguese. I mean, which Elvish language are you speaking about? Because the reality of it is that there's two main Elvish languages. There's Sindarin and Quenya. And Quenya, when spoken properly, actually sounds more Finnish than anything, while Sindarin sounds very Celtic, almost Welsh, when it's spoken properly. But yeah, Portuguese is interesting because, I mean, obviously Portuguese is very close to Latin, but yeah, I see what you're saying, man. I see what you're saying. But yeah. So, was there anything else in this that I wanted to talk about in this? No, I think that's really it. I mean, like I said, we're going to get to the Mirror after they come out of Moria and the Crown of Durin and everything. But I wanted to mention Durin the Deathless, and yeah, whatever they speak in the movies, it's usually Sindarin. Yeah. Some of the actors were, I guess some of the actors did sound kind of vaguely Portuguese. You know who really had the perfect Sindarin accent was actually Liv Tyler, who played Arwen. When she speaks it, you can feel that Celtic sort of feel to the language, that it's meant to sound sort of vaguely Welsh, you know? All right, let's continue on here. I like that, said Sam. I should like to learn it in Moria and Khazad-dum, but it makes the darkness seem heavier thinking of all those lamps. Are there piles of jewels and gold lying around here still? Gimli was silent. Having sung his song, he would say no more. Piles of jewels, said Gandalf. No. The orcs have often plundered Moria. There is nothing left in the upper halls, and since the dwarves fled, no one dares seek the shafts and treasuries down in the deep places. They are drowned in water, or in a shadow of fear. Then what do the dwarves want to come back for? Asked Sam. For Mithril, answered Gandalf. The wealth of Moria was not in gold and jewels, the toys of the dwarves, nor in iron their servant. Such things they found here, it is true, especially iron. But they did not need to delve for them. All things that they desired they could obtain in traffic. For here alone in the world was found Moria silver, or true silver as some have called it. Mithril is the Elvish name. The dwarves have a name which they do not tell. Its worth was 10 times that of gold, and now it is beyond price. For little is left above ground, and even the orcs dare not delve here for it. The loads led away north towards Carithris and down to the darkness. The dwarves tell no tale, but even as Mithril was the foundation of their wealth, so also it was their destruction. They delved too greedily and too deep, and disturbed that from which they fled, Durin's bane.
Of what they brought to light, the orcs have gathered nearly all, and given it in tribute to Sauron, who covets it. Mithril. All folk desired it. It could be beaten like copper, and polished like glass, and the dwarves could make of it a metal, light and yet harder than tempered steel. Its beauty was like to that of common silver, but the beauty of mithril did not tarnish or grow dim. The elves dearly loved it, and among many uses they made of it, Ethelden, the star moon which you saw upon the doors. Bilbo had a corselet of mithril rings that Thorin gave him. I wonder what became of it. Gathering dust still in Meikle Museum, I suppose.
Let's catch up on the Celts are the main influence in Portuguese language, apart from Latin. That makes a lot of sense, yeah. I actually found out, you'll find this interesting, that a lot of my own heritage is Portuguese. I was raised with sort of the thought that on the one side of my family, on my mother's side, was a lot of just sort of vaguely European heritage, Italian and English and such. And on the other side, my father's family hailed from Puerto Rico, some of them native, some of them of Hispanic extraction. But my sister, at one point, did one of those, those sort of DNA tests where you get the thing and you sort of swab the spit and you send it off to them, and then they send it back to you and they tell you, in percentages what you are. And, and I figured I'll have a look at it. I don't really want to do it myself. And, since she's my sister, our DNA is pretty similar. I wouldn't imagine any sort of significant difference between us. And what we saw was that I was something like 35% Portuguese. It was the very first thing on the list. So it has to be on both sides there. And hello there, Vici. Am I saying it right? Hello, welcome in. But yeah, so I found out that, yes, I have quite a bit of Portuguese origin in myself. Although I don't know the language, so there is that. All right, let's continue onwards here.
What? Cried Gimli, startled out of his silence. A corselet of Moria silver? That was a kingly gift. Yes, said Gandalf. I never told him, but its worth was greater than the value of the whole Shire and everything in it.
Frodo said nothing, but he put his hand under his tunic and touched the rings on his mail shirt. He felt staggered to think that he had been walking about with the price of the Shire under his jacket. Had Bilbo known? He felt no doubt that Bilbo knew quite well. It was indeed a kingly gift. But now his thoughts had been carried away from the dark mines, to Rivendell, to Bilbo, and to Bag End in the days when Bilbo was still there. He wished with all his heart that he was back there, and in those days mowing the lawn or puttering about the flowers, that he had never heard of Moria or Mithril or the ring. A deep silence fell. One by one the others fell asleep. Frodo was on guard. As if it were a breath that came in through unseen doors out of deep places, dread came over him. His hands were cold and his brow damp. He listened. All his mind was given to listening and nothing else for 2 slow hours, but he heard no sound, not even the imagined echo of a footfall. His watch was nearly over when far off, where he guessed that the western archway stood, he fancied that he could see 2 pale points of light, almost like luminous eyes. He started. His head had nodded. I must have nearly fallen asleep on guard, he thought. I was on the edge of a dream. He stood up and rubbed his eyes and remained standing, peering into the dark, until he was relieved by Legolas. So he sees very briefly, he sees Gollum's eyes there. And what's interesting is you might wonder, well, how is it nobody else notices Gollum? And it was mentioned that ever since he got stabbed by the Witch King there, and almost faded into the Wraith world, that he can see in the dark really, really well. So Gollum is probably thinking that he's far enough back to not be noticed, but Frodo very quickly caught a glimpse of him there, but sort of chalks it up to he nearly fell asleep. When he lay down, he quickly went to sleep, but it seemed to him that the dream went on. He heard whispers, and he saw the 2 pale points of light approaching slowly. He woke and found that the others were speaking softly near him, and that a dim light was falling on his face. High up above the eastern archway, through a shaft near the roof, came a long pale gleam, and across the hall through the northern arch, light also glimmered faint and distantly. Frodo sat up.
"Good morning," said Gandalf. "For morning it is again at last. I was right, you see. We are high up on the east side of Moria. Before today is over, we ought to find the great gates, and see the waters of Miramere lying in the Dimril Dale before us.
I shall be glad, said Gimli. I have looked on Moria, and it is very great, but it has become dark and dreadful, and we have found no sign of my kindred. I doubt now that Balin ever came here.
After they had breakfasted, Gandalf decided to go on again at once.
We are tired, but we shall rest better when we are outside, he said. I think that none of us will wish to spend another night in Moria.
No, indeed, said Boromir. Which way shall we take? Yonder eastward arch?
Maybe, said Gandalf. But I do not know exactly yet where we are. Unless I am quite astray, I'm guessing that we are above and to the north of the great gates, and it may not be easy to find the right road down to them. The eastern arch will probably prove to be the way that we must take. But before we make up our minds, we ought to look about us. Let us go towards that light in the north door. If we could find a window, it would help. But I fear that the light comes only from deep shafts.
Following his lead, the company passed under the northern arch. They found themselves in a wide corridor. As they went along it, the glimmer grew stronger, and they saw that it came through a doorway on their right. It was high and flat-topped, and the stone door was still upon its hinges, standing half open. Beyond it was a large square chamber. It was dimly lit, but to their eyes, after so long a time in the dark, it seemed dazzlingly bright, and they blinked as they entered. Their feet disturbed a deep dust upon the floor, and stumbled among things lying in the doorway whose shapes they could not at first make out. The chamber was lit by a wide shaft high in the further eastern wall. It slanted upward, and far above a small square patch of blue sky could be seen. The light of the shaft fell directly on a table in the middle of the room, a single oblong block about 2 feet high, upon which was laid a great slab of white stone.
"It looks like a tomb," muttered Frodo, and bent forward with a curious sense of foreboding, to look more closely at it. Gandalf came quickly to his side. On the slab, runes were deeply graven. "Here's a Daeron's rune, such as was used of old in Moria," said Gandalf. "Here is written in the tongue of men and dwarves, Balin, son of Fundin, lord of Moria."
"He is dead, then," said Frodo. I feared it was so. Gimli cast his hood over his face. That's the end of that chapter. We are going to continue into the next chapter. Now, what's interesting is there's this point where they mentioned that there's this deep dust that they're stepping through, and there's this sort of something on the floor, but they're not sure what it is. And, it's the remains of a lot of these dwarves that died. And when Peter Jackson, made his film, The Fellowship of the Ring, he basically had this scene happen almost right when they first came into Moria. There were sort of like old dwarf bones right there, and Gimli started, wailing in despair. And this was like right at the beginning, so... It's interesting that in this, like, even Gandalf is sort of thinking we might find some dwarves in here, that Balin might be in here. And then, of course, we get to this far, and Gimli had just said, I don't think Balin ever came here. And then they find his grave. So we're going to move on to the next chapter here, Chapter 5, The Bridge of Khazad-dum. This is a shorter chapter. It's only, starts on page 335, ends on page 346. So it's not a very long chapter. The chapter after that is pretty lengthy, so that'll be next time, and we'll talk about scheduling stuff too at the end of stream. But let's move on here to Chapter 5, The Bridge of Khazad-dum. The company of the Ring stood silent beside the tomb of Balin. Frodo thought of Bilbo and his long friendship with the dwarf, and Balin's visit to the Shire long ago. In that dusty chamber of the mountains, it seemed 1,000 years ago, and on the other side of the world. At length they stirred and looked up, and began to search for anything that would give them tidings of Balin's fate, or show what had become of his folk. There was another smaller door on the other side of the chamber, under the shaft. By both of the doors they could now see that many bones were lying, and among them were broken swords and axe-heads, and cloven shields and helms. Some of the swords were crooked, orc scimitars with blackened blades. There were many recesses cut in the rocks of the walls, and in them was large iron-bound chests of wood. All had been broken and plundered, but beside the shattered lid of one there lay the remains of a book. It had been slashed and stabbed and partly burned, and it was so stained with black and other dark marks like old blood that little of it could be read.
Gandalf lifted it carefully, but the leaves crackled and broke as he laid it out on the slab. He pored over it for some time without speaking. Frodo and Gimli, standing at his side, could see, as he gingerly turned the leaves, that they were written in many different hands, in runes, both of Moria and Dale, and here and there was Elvish script. Is that how you pronounce Balin? You know what's interesting is I've always said it as Balin, and that isn't also the way, well, sort of the way they said it in the movie. Gimli sort of said it's Balin, and then there was the video game, The Hobbit, which Bilbo said Balin, which I was like, I've never heard that one before, but I believe it's Balin. It's kind of tough because dwarf names, there isn't a pronunciation guide like there is with elf names. With elf names, we're told that the accent, the emphasis, almost always is on the second to last syllable, which is why it's not really Legolas, it's Legolas, you know. I sometimes still lapse back into Legolas because I've been saying Legolas for, before I started studying the linguistics, and they say it that way in the movie. But with dwarves, I mean, we sometimes get accents like an oin or gloin, so that you're not saying oin and gloin. But Balin, I don't know, I'm sort of just going by the Elvish sort of pronunciation here of Balin. The thing is that none of these are their real names anyway, because they have their own secret names in their own secret languages. So my opinion is that we might as well use the Elvish guide to pronunciation with it. Orcs are indeed very skidibby. Yes, indeed, yes, they are. That skidibby thing that my nephews got into that briefly. That it does sound a little bit like the black speech, doesn't it? Can you imagine if it said that on the One Ring? Ashnaz Burzum skidibby toilet. All right, let's continue on here. At last, Gandalf looked up. "It seems to be a record of the fortunes of Balin's folk," he said. "I guess that it began with their coming to Dimril Dale nigh on 30 years ago. The pages seem to have numbers referring to the years after their arrival. The top page is marked 1, 3, so at least 2 are missing from the beginning. Listen to this. We drove out orcs from the great gate and guard. I think the next word is blurred and bird, probably room. We slew many in the bright, I think, sun in the dale. Floy was killed by an arrow. He slew the great, and there's a blur followed by Floy under grass near Mir. The next line or 2 I cannot read. Then comes, we have taken the 21st hall of North End to dwell in. There is, I cannot read what, a shaft is mentioned, and then Balin has set up his seat in the chamber of Mazarbul." "The Chamber of Records," said Gimli. "I guess this is where we now stand." "Well, I could read no more for a long way," said Gandalf, "except for the word gold and Durin's axe and something helm. Then Balin is now Lord of Moria. That seems to end a chapter. After some stars another hand begins, and I can see we found true silver. And later the word well-forged, and then something. I have it! Mithril, and the last 2 lines, Oin to seek for the upper armories of Third Deep. Something go westwards, a blur to Holland Gate." Gandalf paused and set a few leaves aside. "There are several pages of the same sort, rather hastily written and much damaged," he said. "But I can make little of them in this light. There must now be a number of leaves missing, because they began to be numbered 5, the 5th year of the colony, I suppose. Let me see. No, they're too cut and strained, I cannot read them. We might do better in the sunlight. Wait, here's something, a large bold hand, using an Elvish script." "That would be Ori's hand," said Gimli, looking over the wizard's arm. "He could write well and speedily and often use the Elvish characters." Hold on, that noise you heard was Slack. Let me just see if that's anything important, because that's related to Quora.
Oh, okay. It's not anything that needs my attention right now. And yes, we have a Discord if anybody's interested and wishes to join.
I fear he had ill tidings to record in a fair hand, said Gandalf. The first clear word is sorrow, but the rest of the line is lost unless it ends in estre. Yes, it must be yestre, followed by day, being the 10th of November, Balin, Lord of Moria, fell in Dimril Dale. He went alone to look in Miramir, and orc shot him from behind a stone. We slew the orc, but many more, up from the east from the Silverlode. The remainder of the page is so blurred I can hardly make anything out, but I think I can read, we have barred the gates, and then can hold them long if. And then perhaps horrible and suffer. Poor Balin. He seems to have kept the title that he took for less than 5 years. I wonder what happened afterwards, but there is no time to puzzle out the last few pages. Here is the last page of all. He paused and sighed. It is grim reading, he said. I fear their end was cruel. Listen. We cannot get out. We cannot get out. They have taken the bridge in the second hall. Frar and Loney and Nally fell there. And there are 4 lines smeared, so I can only read. Went 5 days ago. The last lines run, the pool is up to the wall at Westgate. The watcher in the water took Oin. We cannot get out. The end comes. And then drums. Drums in the deep. I wonder what that means. The last thing written is in a trailing scroll of elf letters, they are coming. There is nothing more. Gandalf paused and stood in silent thought. A sudden dread and a horror of the chamber fell on the company. We cannot get out, muttered Gimli. It was well for us that the pool had sunk a little, and the watcher was sleeping down at the southern end. Gandalf raised his head and looked around. They seem to have made a last stand by both doors, he said, but there were not many left by that time, so ended the attempt to retake Moria. It was valiant, but foolish. The time is not come yet. Now I fear we must say farewell to Balin, son of Fundin. Here he must lie in the halls of his fathers. We will take this book, the Book of Mazarbul, and look at it more closely later. You had better keep it, Gimli, and take it back to Dain if you get a chance. It will interest him. Oh, it will grieve him deeply. Come, let us go. The morning is passing.
Hey, Coyote, how's it going? Which way shall we go? Said Boromir.
Back to the hall, answered Gandalf. But our visit to this room has not been in vain. I now know where we are. This must be, as Gimli said, the chamber of Mazarbul, and the hall must be the 21st of the north end. Therefore we should leave by the eastern arch of the hall, and bear right and south, and go downwards. The 21st hall should be on the 7th level. That is 6 above the level of the gates. Come on now, back to the hall.
What is foolish is staying there reading. Well, I mean, it's important because as he just said, reading that and the numbers that were used and everything let him realize exactly where in Moria they are. So it's important. Otherwise, because he still didn't know. He said just a little while ago he didn't know exactly where they were. And by knowing that this is the Chamber of Mazarbul and having these references in the book, he knows, where exactly they are and how to get out. So less wandering then. Gandalf can hardly spoken these words when there came a great noise, a rolling boom that seemed to come from the depths far below, and to tremble the stone at their feet. They sprang towards the door in alarm. Doom, doom, it rolled again, as if huge hands were turning the very caverns of Moria into a vast drum. Then there came an echoing blast, a great horn was blown in the hall, and answering howls and harsh cries were heard further off. There was a hurrying sound of many feet. "They are coming!" cried Legolas.
"We cannot get out!" said Gimli.
"Trapped!" said Gandalf.
"Why did I delay? Here we are caught just as they were before. But I was not here then. We will see what
doom, doom, came the drumbeat, and the walls shook. "Slam the doors and wedge them," shouted Aragorn. "And keep your packs on as long as you can. We may get a chance to cut our way out yet."
"No," said Gandalf. "We must not get shut in. Keep the east door ajar. We will go that way if we get a chance."
Another harsh horn call, and shrill cries rang out. Feet were coming down the corridor. There was a ring and a clatter as the company drew their swords. Glamdring shone with a pale light, and Sting glinted at the edges. Boromir set his shoulder against the western door.
"Wait a moment, do not close it yet," said Gandalf. He sprang forward to Boromir's side and drew himself up to his full height. "Who comes hither to disturb the rest of Balin, Lord of Moria?" he cried in a loud voice. There was a rush of hoarse laughter like the fall of sliding stones into a pit, and the clamour of a deep voice was raised in command. Doom, boom, doom went the drums in the deep. With a quick movement, Gandalf stepped before the narrow opening of the door and thrust forward his staff. There was a dazzling flash that lit the chamber and the passage outside. For an instant the wizard looked out. Arrows whined and whistled down the corridor as he sprang back. "There are orcs, many, very many of them," he said. "And some are large and evil, black urks of Mordor. For the moment they are hanging back, but there is nothing else there. A great cave troll, I think, or more than one. There is no hope of escape that way." "And no hope at all if they come to the other door as well," said Boromir. "There is no sound outside here yet," said Aragorn, who was standing by the eastern door listening. "The passage on this side plunges straight down a stair. It plainly does not lead back toward the hall, but it is no good flying blindly this way with pursuit just behind. We cannot block the door. Its key is gone and the lock is broken, and it opens inward. We must do something to delay the enemy first. We will make them fear the chamber of Mazarbul," he said grimly, feeling the edge of his sword, Anduril. Heavy feet were heard in the corridor. Boromir flung himself against the door and heaved it to, and then he wedged it with broken sword blades and splinters of wood. The company retreated to the other side of the chamber, but they had no chance to fly yet. There was a blow on the other door that made it quiver, and then it began to grind slowly open, driving back the wedges. A huge arm and shoulder with a dark skin of greenish scales was thrust through the widening gap. Then a great flat toeless foot was forced through below. There was a dead silence outside. Boromir leapt forward and hewed at the arm with all his might, but his sword rang, glanced aside, and fell from his shaken hand. The blade was notched. Suddenly, and to his own surprise, Frodo felt a hot wrath blaze up in his heart. "The Shire!" he cried, and springing beside Boromir, he stopped and stabbed with sting at the hideous foot. There was a bellow, and the foot jerked back, nearly wrenching sting from Frodo's arm. Black drops dripped from the blade and smoked on the floor. Boromir hurled himself against the door and slammed it again. "One for the Shire!" cried Aragorn. "The hobbit's bite is deep. You have a good blade, Frodo, son of Drogo." There was a crash in the door, followed by crash after crash. Rams and hammers were beating against it. It cracked and staggered back, and the opening grew suddenly wide. Arrows came whistling in, but struck the northern wall and fell harmlessly to the floor. There was a horn blast and a rush of feet, and orcs, one after another, leaped into the chamber. How many there were the company could not count. Their fray was sharp, but the orcs were dismayed by the fierceness of the defense. Legolas shot two through the throat. Gimli hewed the legs from under another that had sprung up on Balin's tomb. Boromir and Aragorn slew many. When 13 had fallen, the rest fled, shrieking, leaving the defenders unharmed except for Sam, who had a scratch along the scalp. A quick duck had saved him, and he had felled his orc, a sturdy thrust with his barrow blade. A fire was smouldering in his brown eyes that would have made Ted Sandyman step backward if he had seen it. "Now is the time," cried Gandalf. "Let us go before the troll returns." But even as they retreated, but before Pippin and Merry had reached the stair outside, a huge orc chieftain, almost man-high, clad in black mail from head to foot, leaped into the chamber. Behind him his followers clustered in the doorway. His broad, flat face was swart, his eyes like coals, and his tongue was red. He wielded a great spear. With a thrust of his huge hide shield, he turned Boromir's sword and bore him backward, throwing him to the ground. Diving under Aragorn's blow with the speed of a striking snake, he charged into the company and thrust with his spear straight at Frodo. The blow caught him on the right side, and Frodo was hurled against the wall and pinned. Sam, with a cry, hacked at the spear shaft, and it broke. But even as the orc flung down the truncheon and swung out his scimitar, Anduril came down upon his helm. There was a flash like flame, and the helm burst asunder. The orc fell with a cloven head. His followers fled, howling, as Boromir and Aragorn sprang at them. Can we imagine, just for a moment, if the movie was like this? A little bit more violent. You got, Gimli is cutting legs off, and Sam gets cut. He's got that farm boy strength. I always say that, it's interesting. I love the casting of Sam in the film, by the way, that just because the actor Sean Astin did such an amazing job of acting. But, a lot of people think that,
because of that Sam is this like the chubby one, because Sean Astin was a bit of a chubby guy. And in reality, out of these 4 hobbits, if anything, Frodo is the one with a little bit of girth, and Sam is probably pretty muscular. He's a guy who works outside with his hands, you know? He's probably pretty strong here. But, I mean, and then Aragorn coming down with the sword and not beheading an orc like you see at the end of the film, but cutting its head in half. Like I said, can you imagine if the movie was like that? I would have been all about it, but, you know, I think some people would have been horrified. I think that the idea of the flames is probably the sparks, because he's cutting not just through the orc's head, but also his helm. And a helm is different from a helmet. A helm is a full covering, so he's cleaving through metal here. Anduril, a very powerful, very sharp sword, very ancient sword. Interesting point in the film, The Return of the King, the mouth of Sauron refers to Aragorn's sword as an elven blade. It's actually not an elven blade, it's a dwarven blade. It was made by the dwarves. That was replacing a line in the book about elven glass. I think that's why that was said there. All right, let's continue. Doom, doom went the drums in the deep. The great voice rolled out again.
"Now!" shouted Gandalf. "Now is the last chance. Run for it!"
Aragorn picked up Frodo where he lay by the wall and made for the stair, pushing Merry and Pippin in front of him. The others followed, but Gimli had to be dragged away by Legolas. In spite of the peril, he lingered by Balin's tomb with his head bowed. Boromir hauled the eastern door to, grinding upon its hinges. It had great many iron rings on either side, but could not be fastened. "I am all right," gasped Frodo. "I can walk. Put me down." Aragorn nearly dropped him in his amazement. "I thought you were dead," he cried.
"Not yet," said Gandalf, "but there is no time for wonder. Off you go, all of you, down the stairs. Wait a few moments for me at the bottom, but if I do not come soon, go on. Go quickly and choose paths leading right and downward."
"We cannot lead you to hold the door alone," said Aragorn.
"Do as I say," said Gandalf fiercely. "Swords are of no more use here. Go."
So let me just pause and highlight that line. Swords are of no more use here. He's basically saying to stand and fight doesn't work. Just run. The line was used in the movie, and it was put a little bit later. And it referred not to the fact that they were being pursued by orcs, but the Balrog. And people wonder, well, how is it that Gandalf would say swords are of no more use here, and then he kills the Balrog with a sword? It's kind of silly, right? But yeah, that's why, because they move the line and they change the context of it. Oh, absolutely. Because you have to figure that The Hobbit came out in the 30s and The Lord of the Rings came out in the 50s. It took him 20 years to finish this. He started it in 1938, right after The Hobbit was published, basically. But it took him a long time. The Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers came out in, I believe, 1954, and then 1955, The Return of the King came out. So he was thinking in his head probably that a lot of the children who read The Hobbit were grown up now. One of his letters is out there. It's one of his more interesting letters in terms of just that he's responding to some little girls who wrote him that were big fans of The Hobbit, and they were very much hoping to read the sequel. And he wrote them back and said that I it's going to be a while, and I hope that by the time it comes out that you have not grown up too much and that you still enjoy this sort of thing. He definitely, yes, he wrote it for a more mature audience. There's no doubting that. I mean, and then if you get into, some of the other stories like the Children of Húrin, would horrify most fans of The Lord of the Rings. The passage was lit by no shaft and was utterly dark. They groped their way down a long flight of steps and then looked back, but they could see nothing, except high above them the faint glimmer of the wizard's staff. He seemed to be still, standing on guard by the closed door. Frodo breathed heavily and leaned against Sam, who put his arms around him. They stood peering up the stairs into the darkness. Frodo thought he could hear the voice of Gandalf above, muttering words that ran down the sloping roof with a sighing echo. He could not catch what was said. The walls seemed to be trembling. Every now and again the drum beats throbbed and rolled, doom, doom. Suddenly at the top of the stair there was a stab of white light. Then there was a dull rumble and a heavy thud. The drum beats broke out wildly, doom, boom, and then they stopped. Gandalf came flying down the steps and fell to the ground in the midst of the company.
Well, that's over, said the wizard, struggling to his feet. I have done what I could, but I have met my match and have nearly been destroyed. But don't stand there. Go on. You will have to do without light for a while. I am rather shaken. Go on. Where are you, Gimli? Come ahead with me. Keep close behind, all of you.
They stumbled after him, wondering what had happened. Doom, went the drum beats again. And now they sounded muffled and far away, but they were still following. There was no other sound of pursuit, neither tramp of feet nor any voice. Gandalf took no turns, right or left, for the passage it seemed to be going in the direction that he desired. Every now and again it descended a flight of steps, 50 or more, to a lower level. At the moment that was their chief danger, for in the dark they could not see a descent until it came upon it, and put their feet out into emptiness. Gandalf felt the ground with his staff like a blind man. At the end of an hour they had gone a mile or maybe little more, and had descended many flights of stairs. There was still no sound of pursuit. Almost they began to hope that they would escape. At the bottom of the 7th flight Gandalf halted.
It is getting hot, he gasped. We ought to be down to at least the level of the gates now. Soon I think we should look for a left-hand turn to take us east. I hope it is not far. I am very weary. I must rest here a moment, even if the orcs ever spawned after us.
Gimli took his arm and helped him down to a seat at the step.
What happened away up at the door? He asked. Did you meet the beaters of the drums? I do not know, answered Gandalf, but I found myself suddenly faced by something I have not met before. I could not think of nothing to do but to try and put a shutting spell on the door. I know many, but to do things of that kind rightly requires time, and even then the door can be broken by strength. As I stood there I could hear orc voices on the other side. At any moment I thought they would burst it open. I could not hear what was said, but they seemed to be talking in their own hideous language. All I caught was, "Gosh! That is fire." Then the orcs themselves were afraid and fell silent. It laid long on the iron ring, and then it perceived me and my spell. What it was I cannot guess, but I have never felt such a challenge. The counterspell was terrible. It nearly broke me. For an instant the door left my control and began to open. I had to speak a word of command. That proved too great a strain. The door burst to pieces. Something dark as a cloud was blocking out all the light inside, and I was thrown backwards down the stairs. All the wall gave way, and the roof of the chamber as well, I think. I'm afraid Balin is buried deep, and maybe something else is buried there too, I cannot say. But at least the passage behind us was completely blocked. I have never felt so spent, but it is passing. And now, what about you, Frodo? There was not a time to say so, but I have never been more delighted in my life than when you spoke. I feared that it was a brave but dead hobbit that Aragorn was carrying.
What about me? Said Frodo. I am alive and whole, I think. I am bruised and in pain, but it is not too bad. Well, said Aragorn, I can only say that hobbits are made of stuff so tough that I have not met the like of it. Had I known, I would have spoken softer at the inn in Bree. That spear thrust would have skewered a wild boar. Well, it did not skewer me, and I'm glad to say, said Frodo, though I feel as I've been caught between a hammer and an anvil. He said no more. He found breathing painful. You take after Bilbo, said Gandalf. There is more about you than meets the eye, as I said of him long ago. Frodo wondered if the remark meant more than it said. Hello there, Nosarian. How's it going? Glad you're enjoying the channel. This is not the only direct use of magic by Gandalf. Well, you did say one of the only direct use of... he did light the fire at Carathris, so there was that, and he has been using his staff to make light throughout this entire portion of the journey. But what we see here, and I was actually pausing to... and I'm going to answer you in a moment, Moogle. He used a word of command. And that was the strain that broke the door. Now, obviously I'm reading it aloud, so you're not seeing the text, but the word of command is a capital C. And what we're seeing here is a glimpse into Gandalf's true power, which is not so much in magical fireworks or making light or, anything like that, or setting wolves on fire or any of the other sort of tricks that he does. But the Ainulindala, which is an Elvish word that means the music of the holy ones. Ainur being the Elvish word that means holy one, which would be Englished as angel. And it was the Ainur that sang the world into existence. Iluvatar, of course, was the one that gave it form. Iluvatar is God. He gave the world form, but he based it off of the Ainulindala, the Song of the Angels. So when the voice issues on YouTube here... Okay, hold on. Something's going on. Are we live? Because, okay, somebody on Twitch is telling me that the stream died. And I did see an alert. It seems to be working, though. Are we live still? Can we check? Hold on. Let's see if the YouTube stream is still going. Should be good. Can we check? Okay, now we're live on YouTube. Are we live on Twitch? Okay, so yeah, all right. YouTube is working. Now, Moogle just said, no, I can't hear you, which is kind of a silly thing to say because how would you know? Okay, we should be back. We should be back. That was annoying. Let me just... Test. Okay, we're good? Could we get confirmation that we're live on both platforms? Okay, on Twitch... Okay, yeah, the audio isn't going through. Is it working? Is audio working on YouTube? Let me check. Test. Test. Okay, on Twitch... Okay, it looks like... Okay. Hopefully it's working now. Can we get a... Well, let me see. Let's see if this is working. Okay, I'm not getting audio on Twitch for some reason. Let me check YouTube. I'm sorry about this, guys. I don't know if you guys are hearing me or not. Okay, yeah. All right, audio is working on YouTube just fine. Is audio working on... Yeah, audio is working on YouTube just fine. For some reason, Twitch is not broadcasting audio. Okay. What is this 5 by 5 thing that you keep saying? I don't know what that means. The audio is working, just not working on Twitch. Which is strange. I'm going to try and troubleshoot that, guys. Give me a moment. I'm very sorry about this. Let me get the Twitch window back up. All right, let's see. I'm going to unplug the microphone and plug it back in again and see if that fixes things on the Twitch end. But it seems that my connection to Twitch is pretty bad right now, and that's affecting the YouTube side as well. All right, let's see. Test, test, test. Test, test, test. It means all good? Okay. Yeah, it's working on... It's a little delayed on Twitch, so... For some reason, there is no audio on the Twitch side. And I don't know why. I can't understand why that would be happening. So, the only thing that I can think to do here is you're going to see the stream end for a moment. I'm going to end the stream, and I'm going to finish on YouTube. Okay, we should be good on the YouTube end. Sauron's doing. Yes, obviously. He has caused me ill. On YouTube? Yeah. Okay, so I'm no longer streaming on Twitch. Alice, if you could do me the biggest favor and just sort of like go to the Discord and sort of let people know, because they're not able to hear me on Twitch, that there was some sort of issue where the audio was not going through to Twitch, and that I'm finishing the stream on YouTube. There's not a lot left, but I would like to finish this chapter. And this is a mess because I wasn't recording, so I'm going to have to download the videos from YouTube because they won't work. The Twitch ones, this audio went out at one point, and edit it together into a video instead of just making the video. But let's see if we can finish this off here. There's not a whole lot left. There's only 3 more pages. We were talking about the word of command in the Ainu Lindala. And essentially the point that I was making was that this is one of the most powerful magics that can be imagined in Tolkien's Legendarium. So what we're seeing here is that Gandalf he said it himself, he's met his match. The Balrog is an angel too, just like Sauron is an angel. They're fallen angels, but they're still angels. And the Balrog is something very much like Gandalf in that it's incarnated into a physical form. Now, incarnated, some people get caught up on this. And they think, incorrectly, that incarnated means has a body. And I'll say things a lot that, for example, that Sauron was never incarnated. And people say, yes, he was. I say, no, he wasn't. He was never incarnated. And people say, well, he had a body at this point, he had a body at that point. Incarnated doesn't mean has a body. Incarnated means bound to flesh. Bound is the important part here. All of the angels could make themselves bodies, but the bodies were like clothes, and you could cast off your clothes and not be diminished in any way. Maybe a bit embarrassed, but not diminished. Your clothes could be damaged. They could be ripped and torn and burned, but it's not you that's being damaged. This is really important. So, with Gandalf, as with the Balrog and with all the other wizards, they're incarnated. That means that the bodies are them. They're bound to that body. That's why Gandalf gets tired. That's why he gets hungry and thirsty, and he can feel pain. All right, I don't know if Alice is still there. I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm going to post in the Discord real quick, and then we're going to finish this. Okay, there we go. All right, I've let people in the Discord know that due to some sort of glitch that happened, that audio was not transmitting through to Twitch. It was only transmitting to YouTube. So I'm just going to finish this on YouTube here. So I'm thank you for all the people on YouTube that have stuck through this. Let's finish this now. They now went on again. Before long, Gimli spoke. He had keen eyes in the dark. "I think," he said, "that there is a light ahead, but it is not daylight. It is red. What can it be?"
"Gosh," muttered Gandalf. "I wonder if that's what they meant, that the lower levels are on fire? Still, we can only go on."
Soon the light became unmistakable, and could be seen by all. It was flickering and glowing on the walls away down the passage before them. They could now see their way. In front of the road sloped down swiftly, and some way ahead there stood a low archway, though in the growing light the air became very hot. Then they came to the arch Gandalf went through, signing for them to wait. As he stood just beyond the opening, they saw his face lit by a red glow. Quickly he stepped back.
"There is some new devilry here," he said, "devised for our welcome, no doubt. But I now know where we are. We have reached the first deep, the level immediately below the gates. This is the second hold of Old Moria, and the gates are near, away beyond the eastern end on the left, not more than 1/4 of a mile. Across the bridge, up a broad stair, along a wide road, through the first hall and out. But come and look."
They peered out. Before them was another cavernous hall. It was loftier and far longer than the one in which they had slept. They were near its eastern end. Westward it ran away into darkness. Down the center stalked a double line of towering pillars. They were carved like holes of mighty trees whose boughs upheld the roof with a branching tracery of stone. Their stems were smooth and black, but a red glow was darkly mirrored in their sides. Right across the floor, close to the feet of 2 huge pillars, a great fissure had opened. Out of it a fierce red light came, and now and again flames licked at the brink and curled about the bases of the columns. Wisps of dark smoke wavered in the air. Let me check. Hold on a second. I'm just making sure. I'm just so paranoid now about the stream dying. I'm just making sure it's still going. I'm just going to have it playing, but I want it to be playing, but muted, you know. And my chat is not working properly. Oh, okay. Yeah, I had to refresh. I was not seeing chat. Well, yeah. I don't know what happened. I really don't know what happened. For some reason, I was still broadcasting to Twitch, but it was not the audio cut out. It was the weirdest thing. I played the stream on Twitch, and I couldn't hear myself. I played it on YouTube, and I can hear myself. I've never seen that happen before. I mean, tomorrow I'll be, streaming just on Twitch, and hopefully it works. I don't know what that's all about. Well, let's finish. Let's finish. Okay.
"If we had come by the main road down from the upper halls, we could have been trapped here," said Gandalf. "Let us hope that the fire now lies between us and pursuit. Come, there is no time to lose."
Even as he spoke, they heard again the pursuing drumbeat, doom, doom, doom. Away beyond the shadows of the western end of the hall there came cries and horn calls, doom, doom. The pillars seemed to tremble and the flames to quiver.
"Now for the last race," said Gandalf. "If the sun is shining outside, we may still escape. After me."
He turned and left, and sped across the smooth floor of the hall. The distance was greater than it looked. As they ran, they heard the beat and echo of many hurrying feet behind. A shrill yell went up. They had been seen. There was a ring and clash of steel. An arrow whistled over Frodo's head. Boromir laughed. "They did not expect this," he said. "The fire has cut them off. We are on the wrong side."
"Look ahead," said Gandalf. "The bridge is near. It is dangerous and narrow."
Suddenly, Frodo saw before him a black chasm. At the end of the hall, a floor vanished and fell to an unknown depth. The outer door could only be reached by a slender bridge of stone, without curb or rail, that spanned the chasm with one curving spring of 50 feet. It was an ancient defense of the dwarves against any enemy that might capture the first hall and outer passages. They could only pass across it in single file. At the brink, Gandalf halted, and the others came up in a pack behind.
"Lead the way, Gimli," he said. "Pippin and Merry next, straight on and up the stair beyond the door."
Arrows fell among them. One struck Frodo and sprang back. Another pierced Gandalf's hat and stuck there like a black feather.
Frodo looked around. Beyond the fire he saw swarming black figures. There seemed to be hundreds of orcs. They brandished spears and scimitars, which shone red as blood in the firelight. Doom, doom, rolled the drum beats, growing louder and louder. Doom, doom. Legolas turned and sent an arrow into the string, though it was a long shot for his small bow. He drew, but his hand fell, and the arrow slipped to the ground. He gave a cry of dismay and fear. 2 great trolls appeared. They bore great slabs of stone, and flung them down to serve as gangways over the fire. But it was not the trolls that had filled the elf with terror. The ranks of the orcs had opened, and they crowded away, as if they themselves were afraid. Something was coming up behind them. What it was could not be seen. It was like a great shadow, in the middle of which was a dark form, of man-shape maybe, yet greater, and a power and terror seemed to be in it and to go before it. It came to the edge of the fire, and the light faded as if a cloud had bent over it. Then with a rush it leaped across the fissure. The flames roared up to greet it, and wreathed about it, and a black smoke swirled in the air. Its steaming mane kindled and blazed behind it. In its right hand was a blade like a stabbing tongue of fire. In its left it held a whip of many thongs. "Aye, aye," wailed Legolas. "A Balrog! A Balrog has come!" Gimli stared with wide eyes. "Durin's bane," he cried, and letting his axe fall, he covered his face. "A Balrog," muttered Gandalf. "Now I understand." He faltered and leaned heavily on his staff. "What an evil fortune! And I am already weary." The dark figure streaming with fire raced toward them. The orcs yelled and poured over the stone gangways. Then Boromir raised his horn and blew. Loud the challenge rang and bellowed like the shout of many throats under the cavernous roof. For a moment the orcs quailed, and the fiery shadow halted. Then the echoes died as suddenly as a flame blown by the dark wind, and the enemy advanced again. I have to pause here just to say, the Horn of Gondor that Boromir is blowing actually for a moment stops the Balrog from walking forward. It actually pauses there, which really shows you the power of these sort of horns. There was the horn of Helm Hammerhand, there was the helm of Orome, all very important. And here we see that, this Balrog, this very, very, very powerful demon, because Balrog means in Sindarin, powerful demon. In Quenya, it would be Valarauco. And this horn blast actually pauses him for a moment. A lot of people don't catch that, which I think is interesting. "Over the bridge!" cried Gandalf, recalling his strength. "Fly! This is a foe beyond any of you. I must hold the narrow way. Fly!" Aragorn and Boromir did not heed the command, but still held their ground side by side, with Gandalf at the far end of the bridge. The others halted just within the doorway at the hall's end and turned, unable to leave their leader to face the enemy alone. The Balrog reached the bridge. Gandalf stood in the middle of the span, leaning on his staff with his left hand, but in his other hand Glamdring gleamed cold and white. His enemy halted again, facing him, and the shadow about it reached out like 2 vast wings. It raised the whip, and the thongs whined and cracked. Fire came from its nostrils, but Gandalf stood firm. "You cannot pass," he said. The orcs stood still, and a dead silence fell. "I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass." The Balrog made no answer. The fire in it seemed to die, but the darkness grew. It stepped forward, slowly to the bridge, and suddenly it drew itself up to a great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall. But still Gandalf could be seen, glimmering in the gloom. He seemed small and altogether alone, grey and bent like a wizened tree beyond the onset of a storm. From out of the shadow a red sword leaped, flaming. Glamdring glittered white in answer. There was a ringing clash and a stab of white fire. The Balrog fell back, and its sword flew up in molten fragments. The wizard swayed on the bridge, stepped back a pace, and then stood still. "You cannot pass," he said. With a bound, the Balrog leaped full upon the bridge. Its whip whirled and hissed. "He cannot stand alone," said Aragorn suddenly, and ran back along the bridge. "Elendil!" he shouted. "I am with you, Gandalf." "Gondor!" cried Boromir, and leaped after him. At that moment Gandalf lifted his staff, and crying aloud he smote the bridge before him. The staff broke asunder, and fell from his hand. A blinding sheet of white flame sprang up. The bridge cracked. Right at the Balrog's feet it broke, and the stone upon which it stood crashed into the gulf, while the rest remained poised, quivering like a tongue of rock thrust out into emptiness. With a terrible cry, the Balrog fell forward, and its shadow plunged down and vanished. But even as it fell, it swung its whip, and the thongs lashed and curled about the wizard's knees, dragging him to the brink. He staggered and fell, grasped vainly at the stone, and slid into the abyss. "Fly, you fools!" he cried, and was gone. The buffering problem is gone. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I just want to pause here. So, two things. Balrogs don't have wings. I've gone over this multiple times. The big thing is that it says that the shadow comes out of it like two wings that could fill up the whole chamber. And it's a simile, and then sort of is parlayed into a mixed metaphor of the wings of the Balrog. They don't really have wings. They don't. They're man-shaped. And it said that earlier. Man-shaped, but greater. Men don't have wings. So this is an important thing. The other thing is Gandalf's speech. Every line has an important meaning. I am a servant of the secret fire is Gandalf identifying himself as one of the Ainur. He's saying, I am an angel of God. So that's the first line. Wielder of the flame of Anor. Now, Anor is an Elvish word that means flame. Now, obviously saying flame of flame is sort of redundant, because that's not really what he's saying. Because Anor, it technically means flame, but it's also the word for the sun. So he's saying to a being that is partially made out of fire, my fire is brighter and holier than yours. You're not going to beat me in flames. And what's interesting is the Balrog understands this and actually reacts to it, because the flames dim and the shadow grows. So he says, all right, we'll go with this. The next thing is he refers to it as flame of Udun. Now, Udun is an Elvish word that means hell. And it refers not only to the idea of hell being a fiery pit, but also to a specific place. Or I should say two specific places. One is there is a... yeah, exactly. There is a place in Mordor, which is called Udun. But also, Udun is also known as Utumno, which was one of the fortresses of Morgoth. So he's saying, I'm not a fool. I know what I'm facing. I know what you are and where you've come from. We are not the same, but I am the greater. All right, let's finish this. There's only like a half a page here. The fires went out, and blank darkness fell. The company stood rooted with horror, staring into the pit. Even as Aragorn and Boromir came flying back, the rest of the bridge cracked and fell. With a cry, Aragorn roused them. Come, I will lead you now, he called. We must obey his last command. Follow me. They stumbled wildly up the great stairs beyond the door, Aragorn leading, Boromir at the rear. At the top was a wide, echoing passage. Along this they fled. Frodo heard Sam at his side weeping, and then he found that he himself weeping as he ran. Doom, doom, doom. The drumbeats rolled behind, mournful now and slow. Doom. They ran on. The light grew before them. Great shafts pierced the roof. They ran swifter. They passed into a hall, bright with daylight from the high windows in the east. They fled across it. Through its great, huge, broken doors they passed, and suddenly before them the great gates opened, an arch of blazing light. There was a guard of orcs crouching in the shadows behind the great door-posts towering on either side, but the gates were shattered and cast down. Aragorn smote to the ground the captain that stood in his path, and the rest fled in terror of his wrath. The company swept past them and took no heed of them. Out of the gates they ran and sprang down the huge and age-worn steps threshold of Moria. Thus at last they came beyond hope under the sky and felt the wind on their faces. They did not halt until they were out of bowshot from the walls. Dimrill Dale lay about before them. The shadow of the misty mountains lay upon it, but eastwards there was a golden light in the land. It was all but 1 hour after noon. The sun was shining. The clouds were white and high. They looked back. Dark yawned the archway of the gates under the mountain shadow. Faint and far beneath the earth rolled the slow drumbeats. Doom. A thin black smoke trailed out. Nothing else was to be seen. The dale all around was empty. Doom. Grief at last wholly overcame them, and they wept long. Some standing in silence, some cast upon the ground. Doom. Doom.
the drum beats faded. And that's where we are going to stop. I don't have really much more to say about the chapter other than what I already have, and we've gone a bit late due to the technical issues that I had. And unfortunately, after this, I'm going to have to download I'm going to have to get rid of the lives because it's all a mess. I'm going to have to download them and edit it into one singular video and put it on YouTube for you guys, for the members to watch for the next couple of weeks, and then everybody will be able to see it. And I'm sorry for all the issues that we had. Alice, if you're still there, if you can do me the biggest favor and just hang out for a few minutes after we end, like if you can come on the Discord, what do you call it, the chat there, the voice chat, and maybe we can test the Twitch thing and see if we can get it working. But I thank everybody for coming by. This was a lot of fun up until the end when we had technical issues. I know, streaming to 2 different services, it's not an exact science, but this is the first time that I've had a major sort of issue here. So I'm gonna talk about the schedule, but we're gonna come over to where is it? Here it is. To the end screen here. So I will be live on both Twitch and YouTube next week on the 17th. I will let you guys know in the community tab and in the Discord what that stream is going to be. I have a few ideas. We'll figure something out. It's going to be something fun. It's not going to be a reading. It's not going to be Council of Tolkien or anything like that. And then 2 weeks after that, on the 1st of May, will be me and Matt and Sid doing the Council of Tolkien podcast. So, and of course, if you're on Twitch, well, I'm not live on Twitch right now, but if you are somebody who follows me on Twitch, I stream every day. So, tomorrow afternoon I'll be live playing 8 Eyes. Anyway, I see you're on the voice chat there, Alice. I'm going to hop on there in just a moment. We'll see you guys next time.